Welcome to Mr. Night Spook. Tonight, in 5 terrifying true park ranger encounters from Texas, we follow those who guard the wild, rangers stationed in places where no map tells the whole truth. From empty towers glowing in the dark to radios that whisper names long forgotten, these are first-hand accounts of the things that watch from the tree line when the rest of the world is asleep. Out here, the silence isn't empty, it's listening, and the land remembers everyone who's ever vanished across it. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 1,000 subscribers. Nearly 90% of you watching never hit that button. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And if you've ever been out in the woods after dark, share what you heard when the forest went quiet. Because tonight we're stepping into the places rangers patrol, but not all of them come back. Dim the lantern, lock your doors, take a breath, and let's begin. I'm not the kind of person who posts stories online, but I need this one to exist somewhere other than my head. If anyone reading this works outdoors, you'll know the feeling I'm about to describe. It happens when the wind drops off in a canyon and you realize the only sound left is your own breathing. You get a sense the land is listening to you. That sensation used to calm me. Now it keeps me up at night. I'm a park ranger, 20 years in, most of it in the Davis Mountains out in far west Texas. Real sky country. People call it empty, but that's only because they don't know how to look. There are live oaks in the gullies that have seen more winters than the highway has seen cars. There's a smell after a storm, creosote and dust and wet stone that is so sharp it makes you feel newly cut open. On clear nights, you can stand under the Milky Way and hear the radio crackle and think that's all there is to the world. Stars and static and your boots on the trail. My regulars were hikers and birders, retirees who came out every spring to count warblers. I knew their names and their favorite switchbacks. I knew the sound of their laughter when they finished a hard climb. Most of my job was helping people find their way back to their cars and reminding them that rattlesnakes don't want to see them either. I had a good partner in those days, a ranger named Elena. She was younger than me but sharper, with a memory for trail spurs like a surveyor. She kept me honest and made coffee that could wake the dead. I'm telling you that because I want you to know I wasn't alone in this. I had a witness for the beginning. By the end, not so much. The first report came on a Tuesday in late spring. A couple from Houston checked in at the station with that washed-out look people get after a scare they can't explain. They'd gone up the old service road, the one we keep closed except for maintenance because a fallen piñon had blocked the trail they wanted. The service road runs out toward what used to be a small ranger outpost, just a shed and a bunk room with a tin roof and a porch that faces a dry creek. It hasn't been in use since before I started. The official reason is budget. The unofficial reason is harder to put on paper. The couple told me the wind had been talking. That was how the woman put it. Not just wind through grass, words, their names. At first it was funny to them, like a campground joke. Then the man heard his own mother's voice say his name. He said it came from the direction of the old outpost. He believed the cabin was occupied because he smelled coffee. Everything about him was reasonable. Sunburned, tired, embarrassed to be rattled. He apologized twice, then asked me to check in case someone was hurt. I didn't make anything of it. People hear strange things when they're tired. The mountains shape sound in ways a city brain doesn't recognize, but I wrote it up out of habit. You log everything. If you don't log it, it never happened, and that's dangerous in work where a missing hour can mean a missing person. On Thursday, Elena got a call from dispatch while I was out checking water tanks. 2 college kids had camped near the service road and reported someone whispering to them just outside their tent. They said they'd heard a radio like ours with a faint voice reading out numbers. They didn't see any flashlights, no footsteps, only whispers and numbers and the occasional tinny squawk. Elena rolled her eyes at me when I came in, but she still pulled the map and circled the spur near the old cabin. "It'll be kids from town," she said. "You know the stories, I did." The old outpost is part of a legend out here. In 1987, back when the park was leaner and men wore their hats like they'd been born in them, a small crew stayed out in that cabin for wildfire monitoring. One night they radioed in strong winds and dry lightning to the south. The next morning a maintenance guy found the porch chairs knocked over and the door chained from the outside like someone had sealed it for winter. The crew, 2 rangers and a seasonal hire, didn't answer their calls. The logbook ended with a short line, 6 mugs. They never found the crew. Officially, you'll read that they must have walked out toward the creek and gotten lost in a storm. Unofficially, nobody kept personnel in that cabin again. The following week, I spoke to a volunteer trail steward, an older man named Harold who never exaggerated. He carried a laminated bird chart and wore the same faded cap every shift. He hesitated before he told me he'd heard his late wife call his name from the creek bed above the cabin. He cried while he said it and then apologized for that too. I put my hand on his shoulder and told him he didn't owe me an apology. I kept my voice even and my face calm. Inside, a weight shifted. We went out that afternoon. I kept my truck to the main road and hiked in the last mile with Elena on foot. Up there, the wind comes down like a long breath. You can hear your boots chew gravel. The cabin sits in a pocket of cottonwoods and scrub juniper. The roof has a sunburned look and the porch leans like an old man trying to hear a joke. The door is chained. That much is true. The chain is newer than the hinges, replaced sometime in the last decade. We both stood there and listened. Nothing. No radio, no voices, only leaves clacking like castanets. We circled the cabin. A door-sized shadow on the inside wall suggested a window had been boarded from within. There were no fresh prints around the steps. Coffee? Elena asked, half smiling. I shook my head. But when we left, a smell clung to my mind. Something warm and bitter. Not strong enough to trust, but not weak enough to ignore. At the truck, Elena scribbled in her field notebook. She had neat handwriting, the kind that looks like it knows what it's doing. Wind steady from the northwest, she said. No evidence of foot traffic. No one home but the devil in my partner's imagination. You're the one who brought the joke, I said. You're the one who wants to check again tomorrow. She wasn't wrong. That night I called my friend in dispatch, an old-timer named Ralph who'd worked the radio since before I came on. He has a habit of eating sunflower seeds, and I could hear the crack of shells while he talked. I asked him out of curiosity if the old call signs from the 80s were recorded anywhere. He laughed. Tape reels got tossed when we went digital, he said.
What are you chasing, a ghost report?
I said I was just trying to be thorough. He said he respected that, then told me a story I hadn't heard. On the night the crew went missing, he said. One of the overnight operators swore he heard the missing Rangers respond to a roll call after they'd already been marked out of service. The operator was green and catching flack. The next day he took his lunch in the parking lot and never came back. People hear what they expect, Ralph said, then cracked another seed and told me goodnight. I slept badly and dreamed about tapping a microphone that would only play back the sound of me tapping. In the morning, before the sun had burned the chill off the grass, Elena met me at the station with 2 thermoses. No field trip, she said, handing me one. Routine. But if our route happens to pass by the service road, I will not be upset. We logged our plan and went. The drive felt longer because we weren't saying much. Out there, you can spend whole days in comfortable silence. This wasn't that. We walked the last mile. I checked the chain while Elena examined the ground. If you've never tried to figure out if a chain has been moved recently, you'll feel silly doing it. All you can do is look for shine where the links rub and ask yourself whether the shine looks new. I didn't think it did. I said so out loud. Saying it made it less likely I'd change the story later to suit myself. The first whisper came when I was 5 yards off the porch. It used my patrol ID, the number I've heard 1,000 times over the radio. I stopped and looked at Elena. She looked at me and I watched her face change. She had heard it too. It wasn't a trick of wind under eaves or a bird call. It was my ID, precise as a fingerprint, said in a voice that sounded like mine if I were farther away. We both stood very still. The second whisper said Elena's last name and then mine together like roll call. It came from the direction of the cabin. Not inside, precisely, more like the cabin's skin had a mouth. I called out, identified us, asked if anyone needed assistance. My voice was too loud. I tried again in a normal tone. The radio on my chest crackled on its own and repeated my own question back to me. Not as an echo, but as if someone else on the channel said it in my voice a beat later. Elena took a slow step closer to the porch. Her hand hovered above her sidearm in an automatic way we're trained to avoid, the way that looks like fear. She forced her fingers to her belt instead. Anybody inside? This is Park Ranger Lopez, we're here to help. Her voice carried clean. The trees didn't give it back. We stood long enough for the sun to slide a finger width lower. The door stayed still. The chain stayed dull. A paper-thin tickle went through my ears, and I thought of the old rumor about pressure changes before a storm. Then I smelled coffee, fresh, dark with the metallic edge of a cheap percolator. Elena smelled it too. She said it was a camping stove, maybe, hidden nearby by someone who didn't want to be seen. We searched the brush and found a faded beer can and a cigarette butt old enough to be brittle. "I want to log this," I said. "I want to log it after we're somewhere else," she said. "This place makes good senses play dumb." On the way back, we didn't talk. We both wrote our own reports separately that night. We didn't compare notes. You never compare notes, not because of protocol, but because once you do, memory becomes a choir and the song gets sweeter or stranger than any one voice intended. Over the next 2 weeks, more people reported voices by the old service road. A group of high schoolers heard cries for help and ran until their lungs burned, then realized the cries were calling each of them by name. A teacher on a solo hike heard a radio whisper her husband's nickname for her, a name no one uses in public. She said she could hear spoons in mugs the way ceramic clinks when it's set on wood. She asked if there was a maintenance crew, and when I told her no, she asked me to please consider putting up a sign that said so. If I had known that, she said, I would have turned around. I asked the superintendent to let me check the cabin interior. He frowned, not at me, but at the idea. "You know how it sits," he said. "Every story becomes bigger when the door opens. Leave it shut. Things are easier for everyone that way." I nodded. I said I understood. I did until the next night when dispatch called me at home because a hiker had failed to return by dark on the South Ridge. I grabbed my gear and met Elena at the truck. We found the hiker an hour later, disoriented but not hurt. He kept saying he'd followed lantern light that kept stepping just out of reach. When I told him there were no lanterns anymore, he pinched the bridge of his nose and said he knew that. He wasn't an idiot, but tell me, what else do you call moving light? He was 25 and smarter than most people who'd ever tell him so. He clutched a single glove like it mattered more than his phone. When he calmed down, he pointed toward the old cabin and asked why there were people inside at that hour. Elena told him there weren't. The kid stared at her and then at me, and I watched him make the calculation that would keep him from saying what he really wanted to say. He thanked us and sat in the back seat quiet all the way to the station. The following morning, I went out alone. I told Elena I was checking a fence line. That was partially true. There was a sag in the southeast fence that had been on the list for a month. I fixed it quickly, then kept walking. I had my radio, my mag light, a thermos with coffee that had gone lukewarm, and a stale granola bar in my pocket. I noted the sky, high clouds, wind from the west, warm enough for snakes. The routine kept my mind grounded, but it didn't fix the rising feeling that I was walking into a conversation already in progress. I reached the cabin in late afternoon. The light through the cottonwoods came down in pale sheets. The door looked like it always did, slightly too small for its frame, like the building had grown around it. The chain was in place. I stood on the first porch step and listened. A fly landed on my knuckle and I let it sit. There were no birds close by. From somewhere upslope, a raven croaked without interest. Then the radio at my chest woke up. It didn't pop like it does when someone keys the mic. It breathed, and that's the only way I can say it. Air came through, faint but warm. A voice whispered my patrol ID and then the word copy like it was a question. I thumbed the mic. "This is Ranger Cole," I said. "Who's calling?" The radio repeated my words back, complete with the little cough I hadn't meant to let out. I didn't press the mic again, but the radio spoke anyway. "Ranger Cole," it said with my voice, but softened like it had been recorded and played back 100 times. "Who's calling?" The cadence was mine. The breath at the end was mine. It made my spine go cold. "Okay," I said out loud to the trees. "Okay." The door chain shifted. Not a dramatic jingling like in movies. A quiet settling, as if whatever had held it taut relaxed a fraction. I stepped onto the porch and saw, at eye level, a narrow seam of darkness at the door's edge. The smell came then, coffee and wet wood like an old cabin after a night of rain. I felt like I was intruding, but not on danger exactly. On privacy. I took the chain in my hand. It felt cool and ordinary. There was a padlock, old but oiled. The lock was not engaged. I want to say I checked twice, but I didn't. I lifted the chain free and it slid like a snake going back to its den. The door gave under my hand. I told myself I would open it an inch and call. I opened it wider than that. The room inside held the day like a stopped watch. Dust hung mid-air, suspended in a shaft of light from a high window I hadn't realized was there. The place smelled lived in, wood, sweat, coffee, a hint of wool from old blankets. There was a table in the middle with 6 ceramic mugs arranged in a line. Steam rose from them. I blinked and the steam didn't vanish. It coiled and went thin and kept rising. The mugs were different, mismatched. One had a blue rim, one had a chip, one had a swoop of green glaze like ocean water. One had the park emblem. One was plain white with a hairline crack. The last had a ring of brown stain on its handle where someone had set their thumb too often. I said, "Hello?" in a voice that sounded like I was talking inside a church. Nothing answered. I stepped in and the floor bent a little with my weight. On the back wall was a radio base with a hand mic on a curly cord. The radio hummed. I could hear my own breathing in it and the creak of the boards under my boots. On a nail by the radio hung a set of keys with a single red plastic tag. The tag was dated April 1987, written in hard block letters by someone who wanted the date to matter to the next person. My hand shook when I reached for the logbook on the table. It was open to a page halfway through. The pencil lines cut the paper with a traveling hand's pressure. I read what I expected to see. The day's wind direction, temperature, a note about lightning to the south. Then a line that said 6 mugs. The next line said, "Roll call." The next said, "Ranger coal copy?" I put my fingers on the table to steady myself. The wood was warm, like skin. My hand left a print that turned dark and then faded. I stared at the radios and watched the mic as if it might lift on its own. From the speaker, my voice came again, close as a whisper next to my ear. "Who's calling?" Only the cabin heard me ask, "What is this?" My own voice answered from the radio a breath later. "What is this?" Not a question anymore, more like a label. The room exhaled. Or maybe I did. I backed toward the door and my heel touched a chair leg. The chair scraped and the sound rang bright. I realized all at once that there were 6 chairs and a 7th mine, waiting at an angle at the table. That angle carried a human expectation. I didn't know how to answer it. I set my thermos on the table. I don't remember deciding to do it. It made sense to my hands. They wanted to leave something while they took something else in exchange. I picked up the mug with the blue rim. The heat through the ceramic was real. My lip found the rim and the coffee inside was not the coffee in my thermos. It was stronger, darker, with a bite like old enamel. I did not swallow. I set it down and watched the liquid shift and settle with a small ring. The radio cleared like a throat. It spoke Elena's last name. Then it said my ID again. Then it said a third name I didn't recognize. The sound wavered, not like an echo but like a memory with bad reception. The third name came again and began to change. Not by letters but by the weight of the vowels, as if the cabin was practicing without a mouth. I thought of the old crew. I thought of their chairs and their mugs and the single line in the logbook that had always felt like a gravestone inscription. Something in my head loosened, the way a knot slips when you pull the right end. I said the third name out loud. I didn't know why. The radio repeated it with clarity as if relieved. I heard movement in the bunk room, a soft shift of fabric, a sigh like someone sitting up. I turned toward the doorway and the air there looked thicker, like heat above a road. I didn't go farther. I'm not a brave man in the way people think of bravery. Nothing in training prepares you for the idea that a room has rehearsed your voice and is now ready to perform with you. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "Do you need assistance?" The radio said the same words with the same cadence, but my question felt old in the room, like the groove in a floor where many feet have turned. A second voice joined mine from the speaker. It was higher, quick, friendly. I knew it without knowing it. It was me if I were younger by 10 years and less careful. "Coffee's on," it said. "We're just taking 5. Then, after a breath, the radio filled with not static but the sound of people shifting in chairs and one person laughing under their breath. I backed toward the door until my shoulders found it. I wanted to run. Instead, I studied the chain in my hands. I could rehang it. I could mark the door and go back to the station and write a report that would read like a power line checklist, and my supervisor would sign it, and we would return to reminding people to pack out their trash. That future existed far enough ahead of me to be visible. It only required me to put the chain back and walk away. The radio said my name one last time in my own voice, but it didn't ask a question anymore. It sounded like a statement you'd make to yourself in a mirror. Then the breath at the end of the phrase extended, just a fraction, and in that gap I heard something I cannot argue down with logic. The gap echoed me thinking I should call Elena, and then after a beat the radio said in my own voice, "I call Elena." It wasn't repeating what I had said. It was answering the thing I had only thought. I left the thermos and my healthy respect for physics on the table and stepped out into the daylight. The door closed. The chain settled easily and then felt heavier than it looked. I didn't take the radio off my chest. I didn't call anyone until I reached the junction where the service road meets the main trail. Then I called Elena and my voice sounded normal, as if I had spent the afternoon doing paperwork. She met me at the station and read my face before I spoke. "You went in," she said. I nodded. I told her everything. I kept my story simple in the way a story has to be simple to survive someone else's look. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked me what I wanted to do with it. She didn't say about it, which I appreciated. What do you want to do with a story is different than what you want to do about the facts. I said I wanted to write it down and then forget it. She said forgetting is a kind of remembering, but she wouldn't stop me from trying. We filed a report under a utilitarian title, Unusual Acoustic Phenomena Near Old Outpost. We did not write about coffee or chairs. We did not write about voices that matched mine. We certainly did not write about the radio using my thoughts like prompts. I went home and slept the sleep of someone whose body has done hard work. In the morning, when I picked up my radio from the charger, it greeted me with a hiss like a yawn and said, soft as a hand on a shoulder, "Copy." After that day, the report slowed, not because people stopped hearing things, but because they stopped going there. Word travels in a place like this without anyone meaning to carry it. Volunteers began to work other trails. Hikers took pictures of the tennis ball blue sky from safer turnouts. The old service road grassed over faster than I expected. On a Sunday a month later, I went back. I told myself I was checking a culvert. The grass on the road whipped my knees. The cottonwoods were in full leaf and made a sound like a crowd talking far away. The chain was where I had left it. My thermos wasn't on the porch or anywhere along the steps. I stood and let the wind comb through my shirt. The radio didn't speak. When I touched the door, the wood felt warm. I wrote a line in my pocket notebook, 6 mugs, and then I crossed it out. It looked like a dare when I saw it on paper. I transferred to another park that fall farther east, near lakes that have their own long memories. I told my supervisor I needed a change of scenery. Elena stayed and texted me now and then with photos of sunrises that could make you cry even if you hadn't seen what I had. She came through my new park once on a road trip and brought me a bag of coffee beans from a little shop in Fort Davis. We drank it on my porch and didn't talk about the cabin. At the end of the night, she said, "When you left, the wind changed." She meant it kindly. Now I wake sometimes at 2:13 a.m., a time I never used to see, and the room has that feeling a church has after a congregation leaves. It smells faintly of rain on tin. The radio I keep by my bed for wildfire alerts is off. Still, something in the silence strains forward the way a dog does when it hears a car 2 miles out. It has taken me a while to notice that when I think of the cabin, my thoughts arrange themselves like a room prepared for company. At the center is a table with 6 mugs and a 7th space right there, just the right size for a thermos. My thermos was a cheap one from the hardware store. You can buy another anywhere, so it's stupid to miss it. I do. Sometimes walking under pines 300 miles away from where this started, I'll hear soft radio noise in my head the way you hear a song you didn't know you had memorized. It isn't a sound as much as a pressure, a suggestion that words would be welcome here. I'll think the first line of a check-in as a joke. Ranger Cole, I'll think, copy. And in that breath between thought and what comes next, I feel something in the air lean in, attentive and polite, recognizing my voice as practice it has already done. I don't have an ending to this. People want conclusions. I do too. I could pretend I went back and opened the door and found the crew waiting with explanations, or that I found my thermos on a chair with a note folded underneath. I didn't. I could say I heard my name clear as a bell in my new park and turned to see an empty clearing. That part happened, but it doesn't mean anything on its own. What I have is a room that accepted my voice as part of its furniture, and a radio that sometimes answers what I haven't said yet, and a memory of coffee I can taste like a word on the tongue. Once, about a month ago, I woke to a whisper in the space behind my teeth. It wasn't inside my ear like a dream. It was the way a thought feels when it doesn't belong to you. The whisper said, "Roll call," and then it waited. I lay there and did what you do when a sound asks you to make it complete. I stayed quiet so I wouldn't teach it anything new. The ceiling was the same as always. The night held. Somewhere, I imagined. 6 chairs creaked in a circle and a 7th sat angled toward the door, breathing in the day anyone might bring with them. I am writing this down now because that seems like the polite thing, like leaving a note on a table where you borrowed a chair. If you hike in the Davis Mountains, you'll see the way the wind makes the cottonwoods talk with their hands. If you hear a voice say your name from anywhere you can't put your body, do what you want. I'm not a priest, but if you walk a service road and smell coffee, and the chain on a door feels lighter than it should, and you find a room prepared for more people than you can see, just understand that listening works both ways. I listened once. Something out there heard me back. And on certain still nights when the sky pulls all the sound out of the land and keeps it for the stars, I get the distinct impression I am being counted, quietly and precisely, whether or not I answer. I'm not the kind of person who writes stuff online, but my hands still shake when I drive past water at night, and I can't keep this jammed in the back of my head anymore. If even one other person reads this and recognizes something they saw over Possum Kingdom Lake last fall, then maybe I won't feel as crazy as the psychologist in Graham suggested I might be. My name doesn't matter. I was the new ranger posted to the night rotation at the lake after Labor Day, when the crowds thin out and the quiet gets big enough to hear your own breath. People think the work is handing out maps and reminding folks about burn bans. Some nights that's true. Other nights it's dust and moths around the station floodlights and a radio that won't shut up with little things that turn into big ones. That September, the nights were still warm. The water still gave off its day heat, and the cicadas dragged out their buzz like the power lines humming when the AC kicks on. It felt ordinary, the way most bad stories start. I'd transferred in from a smaller park outside of Stephenville. Possum Kingdom has a personality. The cliffs cut the wind into slices. The trees along certain coves drown half their root balls and keep growing anyway. When the water level is low, you see the old stone steps that used to lead somewhere. And when it's high, those steps disappear and people swear they see lights down where the stairs end. Tourists love those stories. Locals say it's reflections off boat decks or truck headlights over the ridge or a marina sign flickering. I came in expecting that, because expecting ordinary explanations is how you stay sane on the job. My first week was all slow drives along the park roads, learning the radio call signs, getting used to the way the fog moves on that lake like it's breathing. There were 4 of us on the overnight rotation that month. Me, a veteran named Roy who looked like he'd been cut from a piece of cedar and left in the sun, a woman named Marisol who could fix anything with a piece of wire and had a way of staring into the dark like she was reading it, and Liam, who was technically still a trainee but knew the local fishing spots better than most visitors. Dispatch was a woman named Carmen during the evenings and a guy called Howell after midnight. Sheriff's office was a longer radio chain, and if you needed them, you learned to phrase things a certain way so the right person showed up. The first call about the lights came on my 5th night. A couple in an RV had parked near one of the older picnic areas and called in because they thought someone was trolling for fish with a drone after hours. It's illegal to spot fish that way. Not to mention dangerous, those cliffs can throw wind up at you like a slap. I took it because I was closest and because Roy, who was packing up paperwork, lifted his eyebrows and said, "You'll want to see how this lake plays tricks. It'll teach you by slapping you around first." I pulled up and found the couple waiting at the edge of the picnic area with their arms crossed, the woman wrapped in a blanket even though it was 70-something. "It's out there," the man said, pointing past the drowned tree line where the shoreline curves in like a crooked finger. "It's been making squares. I'm not kidding, like a search grid. Our dog won't come out from under the table." I shut off my engine. You learn to do that when you want to listen to a place. The crickets fall into place like a second hand on a clock. Wind hisses in the dry grass. The lake at night makes a sound like a big animal settling its weight. I walk down toward the waterline. The ground there is gritty with crushed limestone and pieces of water-worn beer glass. I let my eyes adjust because phone flashlights teach you to be blind when you turn them off again. At first I didn't see anything, and I had the familiar little lift of relief that comes when you think you'll be able to go back and tell someone it was just reflections or a plane turning. Then something moved above the water. Not moved. Shifted from dim to bright like it had been there all along, waiting for me to slow my breathing down enough to match it. One light, then another, more diffuse like a lantern seen through fog. They weren't high, 40 feet above the surface maybe, level with the tops of the drowned trees. They tracked along the cove, stopped, and dragged themselves in a straight line exactly perpendicular to where they had been moving, then stopped, and did it again. "Drone," the man said. "You see it?" "I told you." I listened for the buzz. Even the quiet drones whined like a nervous mosquito. There was nothing. There was a radio click in my truck from the engine cooling. My radio on my shoulder issued a soft weather update. The lights moved again. I have seen search patterns before. Helicopters do them with spotlights, boat crews do them with flood lamps. You cover ground in a grid so you don't miss a body, or a lost kid, or a piece of a wreck. Watching those two soft lights run back and forth, it's what the back of my mind whispered. Search pattern. I didn't like the way that thought made my neck feel cold. Who would fly a drone that slow? The woman said. And why here? There's nothing out there. It's just dead trees. You can ticket drone operators. You can also approach them and ask them to knock it off by reminding them of every way they could get fined and lose their toy. You can't ticket a light. Practical thinking is a rope you keep wrapping around your hand so you don't fall off the ledge of the weird. I walked the shoreline to a spot where an old dock post stuck out of the mud like a finger bone. The lights were maybe 100 yards out. I raised my radio without keying it and watched. The light stopped. Then one of them brightened a notch. I know this because my brain cataloged the way it lit the thin fog and drew a paler line across the face of the water. I lowered the radio. The lights went on with their crossing and recrossing. I'm going to drive around to the opposite point and see if I can spot who's flying. I told the couple. If they're launching from that side, I'll handle it. The man held out the blanket-wrapped woman's hand for a second like he wanted me to promise it was nothing. I told them to keep their dog inside and their own lights low and not to try to film it. People convince themselves of patterns when they stare through phone screens. They miss the way the wind hits their faces. They nodded, relieved by an authoritative voice saying ordinary things. I drove around. The shoreline road there rumbles your tires with embedded gravel. Mesquites lean in with their arms ready to drag the paint off your doors if you get too close. I cut my headlights near the end and let the parking lights guide me in. There's a spot where the rock falls away and the lake puts its breath right in your face. The lights were closer from this angle, still low, still moving square by square. I walked out onto a snaggle of limestone. I raised my radio again, this time keying it up and saying my call sign, the location, and that I had a potential drone operator over the water. Howell's voice crackled back, bored and awake at once. "Copy. See if you can make contact." "I'm going to hit my service strobe," I said, more to say it than to need permission. There's a little red and blue light on the truck you can flick without the siren. Just enough to remind someone you're official. I thumbed it on 2 quick pulses. The light stopped dead. The skin on my forearms went tight. I clicked it again, 1 long pulse. Both lights brightened just a shade and drifted toward me in a smooth, unhurried glide. I think I said something because Howell asked me to repeat, and I heard my own voice come out too casual. No contact yet. Might be a reflection. I'll continue to observe. When the lights were maybe 50 yards out, they descended. Not a lot. A couple of feet. Then they rose. Then together they did it again like they were nodding. It was too simple a gesture to mean anything, and that was what made my stomach turn. I turned off the strobe. The lights dimmed exactly as far. I turned it back on. They brightened like a heartbeat. "Marisol," I said into the radio. "You at the shop or you out?" "Shop," she said. "Fixing the winch cable you birds keep pretending is optional." "You watching the ferry show?" "What do you mean?" "Third report tonight," she said. "Roy had one by Sandy Beach at 9. He says it paused once right above his hood. He thinks it's teenagers with some new toy. I think teenagers aren't that patient." Her voice changed. "Don't get cute. If it feels wrong, it is." The lights began to climb slowly as if the air was heavier above some line. They drifted away, one ahead of the other, still in a path that mimicked the kind you use when you're searching a surface for a shape that's sunk beneath it. That was the moment I told myself I was watching a phenomenon and not an operator. The patience was wrong. The silence was wrong. The way they responded to my lights but not my voice was wrong too, though I didn't say anything out loud. If I had said stop and they had, I think I would have had to quit. The next day was quiet. A handful of campers came to the office to ask if there would be a meteor shower. They showed us videos on their phones from the night before, grainy, shaky, a pair of lights that look like car headlights reflected in a window until the window shifts, and the lights keep going in straight lines across the lake. We made the noises you make to acknowledge without encouraging. I watched the videos but kept glancing at the people's faces. Their eyes didn't have the sparkle of someone who'd filmed a prank. They had the dull focus of people replaying something they don't understand to see if it looks more ordinary in the daylight. By the end of the week, someone posted in a local Facebook group with a 3-paragraph story about lake lanterns. There were a couple of jokes under it, then a post from a woman whose son had drowned in 2013, reminding everyone to show respect. Then a fisherman chimed in to say that lights reflecting off the surface can look like they're floating if there's a thermal layer. Then someone else mentioned a story their grandfather told about watching brush fires drift across the water during a drought in the 50s. People like the idea that a thing can be slotted into a familiar drawer. I liked that idea too. It just kept not fitting. The second time I got close to them, the wind was up and it felt like the night was trying to skin my face. The trees shook off dry leaves that skittered like insects. I was out near the State Park Marina doing a sweep when I saw a white pulse through the branches and thought at first it was a boat giving a blind blink of its stern light. It came again, then hovered, then slid along the edge of the water and stopped as if it hit a corner. I didn't call it in. That's a confession I probably shouldn't commit to text, but part of me wanted to be alone with it. That sounds bad. What I mean is that the radio creates reality in a way you can't take back. If I said the lights are back on an open channel, then I would have to explain them in the rhythm of protocol. Location, description, response. I wanted to watch without putting it into that language. I stepped down the rocks to the cold edge of the lake. The sound of water moving at night is not the same as during the day. It licks at the shore. It sucks at the spaces between stones. It has a secrecy to it. The light drifted closer, the way someone would walk toward a person with their hands out in a room that had gone dark. I raised my shoulder radio and made myself do it by the book. Unit 12 at the marina. Visual on aerial light of unknown origin. Low altitude over water, moving west to east, maybe 15 yards off my position. No audible prop noise. Copy, Howell said, instantly less bored. Any other activity? Negative. A second light bloomed further down the cove. For a moment, I could see both in the corner of my eye and the scales in my head tip toward fear. Lights that move by themselves already push you if you're honest. Two at once with that weird square over square movement, like they were quietly mapping whatever was beneath them, made me feel like I was standing on top of something with my weight right where it didn't want pressure. Unit 12, Howell said. Roy is north by the bluffs. He can come to you. Negative, I said, too fast. I'm fine. I eased back a step. Gravel slid under my boot. The lake took that piece. The lights held. The first one lifted, descended, lifted again in the barely 2-foot rhythm I'd seen before. They're nodding, I said before I could stop myself. Say again? Nothing, I said, and then I did the thing I had told myself I wouldn't. I clicked the mic twice, 2 short taps like a metronome tone. The closest light brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again in time with those taps. I swallowed. Howl, I said. I've got responsive activity. It appears to be mimicking radio keying. How? He asked. You can't hear a shrug over the air, but it was in his voice. I don't know. My heart thumped exactly where the radio pressed into my shoulder strap. I was aware of the stupid human idea that if I kept my voice bored, the world would be bored back. Stand by. I keyed the mic once and held it. The light flared brighter, held, then dropped with me. I tried a pattern we use when we're testing a stuck mic. Just 3 quick clicks, pause, 3 quick clicks. The light did it back. A beat off like a person trying to clap along to a tempo they didn't know. My mouth tasted metallic. Roy's truck rolled in then slow, headlights half covered by the hill until they were on me. The lights over the water dimmed, then moved off in that patient squat crawl of a square. Roy shut his engine and came to lean next to me like we were 2 old men looking at machinery. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, They were over by the bluffs half an hour ago. Same thing. They like to hit the corners and pause. You're saying that like it's a real behavior, I said. What do you want me to say? His breath smoked. He rubbed his chin with the back of his glove. When I was 20, I watched a kid drown on a calm day because he dove straight, hit a log under there, and knocked himself cold. Whole time we were searching, the sun kept going behind a cloud and coming out, and the glare made everything look like it was down where it wasn't. You ever think about the fact that water is a kind of sky? Things happen on it and under it and over it, and you only see the part that chooses to show itself. I want to know if I'm supposed to treat this as a hazard, I said, forcing myself back onto my rope. If it's a drone, I need to find the operator. If it's not, what am I supposed to do? Document, he said. Be respectful. Don't get cute. I could feel him looking at me when he said that. He knew about the strobe from the earlier incident. Maybe he'd have done it too, but he had a way of making you feel like the lake was listening when you ran your mouth. We got more reports. Some visitors thought it was cool. Some were angry that the park was running training lights at night. One man yelled at me because his wife couldn't sleep and insisted we turn them off. I stood there with his anger like heat on my face and said the sentence you say when you can't think of anything else that sounds official. I appreciate your feedback. He left a 1-star review on a travel site anyway. It mentioned lazy rangers and weird lights and no alcohol allowed. Marisol took to going down by herself after shift and sitting on the boat ramp with a thermos. The first time I found her there, she was humming under her breath, some song I didn't recognize, and watching the fog roll like slow smoke. If they're drones, they've got batteries from the future, she said. They put in the hours. If they're not drones, I don't like the way they pay attention. What do you mean? I asked. They only brighten when you signal by accident, she said, not unkindly. You talk into the box or you flick your little lights. They answer. If you do nothing, they do their work. I'd like them better if they ignored us all the time. The call that shoved everything across the line came on a Tuesday night that felt like a Thursday. That's a stupid detail, but it stuck to the memory. I had been chasing 2 teenagers who'd taken a golf cart and thought it would be funny to leave it in neutral at the top of an incline. I caught them and gave them the lecture that I heard coming out of my mouth in my father's voice. They rolled their eyes, and then 2 hours later I saw them again, sitting on the hood of a friend's car, staring out across the water, quiet in a way I hadn't seen them be before. I was about to razz them when Howell broke in with a tone he didn't use often. Unit 12, Unit 9, Unit 3, respond, he said. Possible vehicle in the water at the south docks. Caller reports engine noise and lights below the surface. Time does a slow tumble when a call comes in like that. I got into my truck and the keys felt slick for a second. I heard the other units acknowledge. Roy calm. Marisol clipped. I pulled out and my headlights cut long white combs through the low mist. The dock area there is a patchwork of old and new concrete poured over older timber, posts leaning like tired men. There's a little concession building with shuttered windows and a soda machine somebody thought was a good idea to leave there in case of day traffic. It's always out of service after midnight. Even before I got all the way down the hill, I saw the shine. Water does this thing with light where it makes it look like it's coming from everywhere. In the shallows, among the drowned cedar snags, something was running. Not the boat ramp tap of a motor against wood, an idling truck engine, a sound I knew by vibration before sound, 6 cylinders throwing their weight forward. The fog made a lid for it. My headlights found the truck where the shoreline made a little pocket, half submerged, angled so the front half was in deeper, water sloshing across the hood in little smacks. The left front door stood open like a mouth. The cab light was on, underwater, weirdly steady. The wheels spun unsettled by the water, throwing a fan of surface glare that made my head hurt to look at. I put my truck in park and went down the rocks at a pace I'd yell at a visitor for. Howell, I said, confirming a pickup in the water, engine running, driver door open, no visible persons. It's a park vehicle. Copy, it's Unit 10. Unit 10 was Liam, he was the kid. He made coffee too strong and always had a little sunburn stripe across his nose. He kept the first aid kits immaculate and carried a pocket notebook with bird sightings and fishing spots and notes about which marinas had which, vending machines in case you wanted cold water at 4 in the morning. My mouth was suddenly too dry to get his name out. Copy Unit 12, Howell said, quicker now, sharper. Sheriff's en route. Fire and EMS notified. Do not enter the water. Marisol came in behind me, her tires spitting gravel. Roy's engine followed like a second heartbeat. The 3 of us stood in a triangle without meaning to. The truck's radio was still on. I know this because a burst of static came from below the water like someone put a radio in a sink. Then a soft series of clicks. I have been around stuck microphones long enough to know that a key can get jammed. This was not that. This was 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. The hair on my neck lifted so hard it hurt. Liam? Marisol said. Not on the radio, just out loud in that way you talk when you hope someone's behind the curtain. Liam, you in there? She had her hand on my shoulder, not touching. Just set near it as if she might steady herself on me if the world lurched. Do not enter the water, Howell said again, and then again, After a pause that made me think he leaned close to his mic. He wasn't talking to us the second time. He was talking on the open channel to whatever was hearing him under there. Roy moved without seeming to. 1 second he was beside me, the next his boots were in the water up to his ankles. "Back," he said over his shoulder, which made no sense because we weren't forward yet. He angled, trying to see into the cab. The dome light made the water look like bad glass, and the fog gave anything beyond 5 feet the kind of softness people pay money to put in photos. You would think there would be bubbles that the exhaust would put out some visible tell. There were none. The engine simply kept running, strong as a stubborn animal. Something brightened way out in the cove. I looked up and saw 2 lights low, level with the tops of the dead trees. The same pair I had seen before, or lights that behaved like them. They moved toward us in that steady glide. I heard Marisol breathe, the kind of breath you make when you step down into a dark cellar. The first light paused over the truck. Not above it, not like a spotlight from a helicopter. Over the waterlogged roof itself, just above the line where the water lipped. It brightened. The second light traced the grid over the water around the truck, square to square, careful in a pattern that felt like kindness or the coldest kind of intelligence. Then both lights dimmed and drifted out over the cove again, as if backing away from an open wound. Roy said a word I won't write here. He put his hand on the roof rail and leaned. The truck shifted. A piece of the hood floated up, then sank as if deciding it didn't want to be part of the world where air lived anymore. "We have to cut the engine," he said, but it was almost rhetorical. We didn't have to do anything yet. We had to wait for the people with the right tools, the ones who wear reflective stripes and put themselves between ordinary things and the places where those things get, mean the red and whites of the fire department, finally cut through the fog like someone lifting a lid. Sheriff's lights parked at an angle and painted everything with that alternating panic that makes your heart want to sink to it. A deputy I knew named Calder came in, looked at the truck, looked at us, and said, "Where's your operator?" No one answered. The firefighter in charge was a square man from Down Lake who could heft a pump unit like a suitcase. He took one long look, gave orders, and within 3 minutes there was a line strung, a diver suiting up, and an engine crew setting chocks like an assembly line. Ordinary official activity puts a blanket on a scene. It did here too for a minute. Then the diver went under and everything got quiet in that way. It does when people are listening with their chests. I was so focused on the line slipping into the water that I didn't notice at first that Howell had gone quiet. Dispatchers fill a silence with little updates. Units acknowledged, timers set, a call to the corner of a map to bring in road support if needed. There was nothing now. Static, then nothing. Then faintly the sound of a mic being keyed once, twice, 3 times, pause, 3 again. Calder's head turned. "Who's doing that?" he said, a snap in his voice like a rubber band. His hand went to his shoulder, but he didn't press the button. "Not us," I said, which was the truth. The sound didn't come through the air so much as vibrate through the water, up through the piled stones. The diver's line twitched. Someone swore under their breath and grabbed it and made that silent eye contact question that firefighters do with each other. The line twitched again, more deliberately, like someone beneath was trying to send, "I hear you." I have never liked the way time can stretch during a rescue and then compress afterward until you feel like you missed a piece. This one did both at once. 1 second the lights were doing their patient squares out in the cove. The next they were right above the diver's bubbles. Low, bright, almost white now, as if the color had been burned out of them. People say they don't believe in things, but everyone at that dock involuntarily took a step back. Even through the fog you could feel it. A pressure like being at the bottom of an old church when the organ plays. The diver surfaced with a heave. He ripped out his regulator and said, "It's empty. It's empty front to back. The door's jammed on a stump, but there's no one inside. The seatbelt's cut. Did someone go in ahead of me?" "No," Calder said. At exactly the same moment, Roy said, "Liam?" And Marisol said my first name as if it were a question. The engine gave a cough like it had forgotten to breathe. Then, this is a thing I have gone over and over trying to make ordinary. The radio in the cab clicked on again. Not speech, not static, a rhythm. 2 clicks, pause, 1, pause, 3. Then after a longer breath, 1 long click. It's stupid to assign meaning to patterns that anyone could accidentally make. People hear words in AC units all the time, but I had been cataloging the way those lights moved for days, the way they mimicked simple patterns. The radio seemed to be learning how to be a light tapping back at us. The diver went under again to hook a line. The fire crew braced. The tow truck driver, who'd rolled up in record time, set his rig and lit a cigarette he didn't smoke. The lights over the water dimmed, drew back, then flared bright in a sharp, decisive way that made leaking rainwater on the dock planks glitter. When the truck came up, gasping and sucking and dumping lake guts across the ramp, we all leaned at the same time, like we had rehearsed a ballet. The cab filled and hummed like a throat clearing. There was no one inside. That became the sentence the sheriff's report would have to carry in its chest like a live coal. The vehicle of Unit 10 was found partially submerged with the engine running and the driver's door open. No operator was located at the scene. They combed the shoreline. They sent a boat with a side-scan sonar to look for a body or for anomalies that might be a person. The divers followed lines and called to each other in that clipped underwater language. People like to think the water will give you back what you lose in it quickly. It doesn't. Sometimes it never does. But the part that clings at me is what came while we stood there, waiting for the next official step. The lights moved closer to us again, slow as a thought. They hovered over the boat wake. I felt the hairs on my hands stand. I saw in the corner of my eye Marisol take Roy's sleeve and hold it the way you hold a couch when you watch a horror movie and don't want to flinch alone. The first light brightened, then dimmed in the exact rhythm of OK that Howell sometimes tapped his mic with when he heard something he couldn't respond to because the channel was busy. The second light flickered in the pattern of an emergency tone, too weak to be loud but strong enough to catch. If they were messing with us, it was in a language we had taught them. Then, because the universe is mean, Howell's voice came in over the air, small and far like he'd backed away from the mic. "Unit 10, he said. Relief hit me with such force that I swallowed wrong. "Unit 10 status," Howell said again, then after a pause that made the edges of my vision go sharp. "Then, if you copy, key twice." The radio in the cab clicked twice. I would swear to that under oath. I would also swear that the lights above the water did the same, a soft, bright like someone blinking with too much effort. After that night, everything got formal. The sheriff's office ran press lines about ongoing investigations. The park issued a statement about safety and cooperation with authorities. The team ran the searches they were supposed to run, and then they ran a few more because no one wanted to go home without covering the same stupid bend of shoreline an extra time. The boys' parents stood at the end of the dock on the third day and stared down with their hands touching. The lake absorbed their eyes like it absorbs everything. The fact that this was my first month there folded over me like wet cloth, heavy and clinging. They put me on day shifts for a while, which was both punishment and protection. Visitors asked me if it was true what they'd read online. A woman waiting for her husband to back a boat asked me if the lake had a history, that flat way people use when they want the story to end with a ghost that can be named. I said there was weather and there were rocks and there were illusions like any other stretch of water, and she smiled like I'd picked the answer she liked best. The lights did not stop. They were quieter. They stuck further out in the cove as if shy about coming in. A week later, on an off night, I went down alone with a thermos the way Marisol did. I told myself I wasn't going to talk to them. I told myself I was there to look at the stars, which were good that night even with the mist. I left my radio in the truck and walked to the little corner of shore where the rocks flatten and the old dock posts lean. The water had a gentle hiss to it. Somewhere on the far side of the lake, a dog barked and another dog answered like a slow echo. I sat on the post, hands in my pockets, and listened to the cold creep into the stones. When the light came, I felt it before I saw it. That sounds like a lie, but there's a way the night changes when something that wasn't bright becomes bright. Your pupils tell your heart. It drifted in from the left, low, cautious. It paused not 50 feet from me like a person who had been told this was close enough. It lifted, descended, lifted, as if reminding me, nod, nod. I didn't move. I didn't breathe in that big way you do to fill your chest with winter. Somewhere behind me, the radio in the truck clicked. Once, then again. I had left it on out of habit. The channel was quiet at that hour. The light flashed twice, then once, then twice again. If I had been a different kind of person, I would have spoken, asked a question that started with, "Are you?" I didn't. I sat there with my hands folded so tight my knuckles hurt and listened to the water say its secret things. A piece of something bumped against the rocks beside me. It was small, plastic, about the size of a stick of gum. I picked it up because that is what you are trained to do. Clear debris from shorelines. It was a whistle. Bright orange, the kind you clip to a life vest. There was a teeth mark on one corner like somebody had bitten down on it hard. There was no engraving, no name. It was the same kind we keep in the emergency kits in our trucks. I looked out at the light because I could not stop myself. It brightened once, then dimmed to a softness that felt like backing away. The sheriff's office added it to their log and told me there was no chain of custody to tie it to anything. "We've all got those whistles," the deputy said. "Half the boaters on this lake have one. Don't get romantic about it." He said it kindly, which somehow made it worse. He didn't want the whistle to be anything. I didn't either. One whistle is an object. A story is a set of objects linked by a ridiculous, fragile string. They moved me back to nights in October because the park is not a place you can make into a padded cell for one person's heart. The first shift back, I brought donuts that went stale by 3 a.m. and laughed too loud at something Roy said about a new hire's inability to fold a map. I told Marisol I wanted to sit a while by the South Docks before I started my loop. She nodded like I had asked to use a room in her house. I drove down with the windows cracked to let the air tell me what it wanted me to know. The lake was low that week. You could see the old steps again, the ones that lead into the water like a suggestion someone forgot to delete. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat with my hand on the ignition key just to feel that I could turn it if I needed to. There's comfort in knowing some decisions still belong to you. It took a long time for anything to happen. If I hadn't been waiting for them, I might have missed the first dim rise in the fog. One light, then two. They hung back out past the drowned trees doing their patient squares. I said nothing. I did not key the mic. I did not flash my lights. I made myself a piece of shoreline. When the first light drifted closer, it stopped where the truck had sat in the water. I could see the line in the stones where the mud had dried differently, the stamp of where the tires had sunk. The light dipped and rose. The second light moved to the corner of the little imaginary grid and paused, brightened slightly, dimmed. The radio on my shoulder gave a short static cough, the kind you get when someone keys up and then lets go. Howell's voice came over it in a low murmur, almost apologetic. "Unit 12, status check." I said the ordinary words. The light flared just once. I can't explain how a simple brightening can feel like a person putting a hand on your shoulder without touching you. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the shape of the whistle I hadn't been able to leave at the station. I didn't pull it out. I sat there for a long time, long enough that the fog began to sink onto the rocks and leave a slick on the soles of my boots. At some point I realized I was crying in that embarrassing, silent way that leaves your face cold. I wiped my eyes with the back of my wrist and laughed without humor, because who sits at a lake and cries at a light that might be nothing but a trick of physics? When I looked up, the lights were gone. After that, I tried to train myself out of it. Work your loop. Respond to calls. Don't make meaning where you don't have to. But the lake had found the string between objects and tied it in a knot in my chest. Between one night and the next, a rumor started that a kid camping over by the peninsula had woken up to see a glow outside his tent and heard tapping on his phone screen. The kind of rumor that burns through a community faster than a real thing because it ends in laughter. There were older rumors too. Once you start listening for them, they stand up and wave. A fisherman swore he'd seen brush fires on the water in the 90s that moved against the wind. A woman in her 70s told me with flat certainty that she used to watch the lanterns in the 60s from her parents' porch, and they would come when someone was lost. Maybe we tell stories as a way of making attention feel like a safe thing. The problem with attention is that it goes both ways. That's what I keep circling. We were looking at the lake. The lake was looking back. We were using patterns to search for things. Something else was learning our patterns and reflecting them at us like a mirror held up in a dark room to show you where the door is. That sounds grand. It wasn't. It was watching little squares of light move with patience no person I know has. It's been months. The official story sits on shelves in folders with words like unresolved and pending. I still work nights sometimes because you can't live in day forever. When I drive, I listen to my radio with the part of my brain that used to listen for my father's truck coming up the driveway. I don't keep my strobe covered with tape anymore. The light is just a thing that helps me be seen, and I'd rather err on the side of being seen by what I do understand. The last time I went down alone to the South Docks, frost had frosted the grass in a whisper and the stars were bright enough to feel like holes you could put your hands through. I stood near the line where the old steps showed. The water was as dark as anything I've ever seen. I didn't bring the whistle. I didn't bring anything I could mistake for a conversation starter. I stood and waited and let the cold tell me I was alive. Across the cove, in the thin scatter of trees, a deer snapped a twig and blew her breath. A dog on a far ranch barked. The radio made a small, familiar click like Howell was rearranging papers. I made myself not look at it. A light came, slow as fog. It hovered over the place where the truck had sat, then moved in its square, patient, respectful way, covering the water as if the water was a person who needed to be tucked in again. The second light waited at a corner, then made a little motion I had not seen before. A soft, sidelong brightening like someone deciding not to step closer. I stood there and didn't do the stupid thing, didn't try to make it into a call and response. When it drifted away, I turned to go. I paused at the top of the steps without meaning to. I don't know why I looked down. Habit maybe. Something caught the light from the station lot behind me. Just a microflash, a hint. I went down 2 steps and crouched until my knees hurt. It was a shallow groove in the stone. It had probably been there for years. It could have been a striation in the rock or a chip from some camper dropping a cast iron skillet, but its shape made my throat tighten. It looked like someone had pressed the edge of a radio mic there, 3 times, then once the way a bored dispatcher might. The stone kept that language better than water does. I put my hand on that cold cut and let it chill the center of my palm. Behind me, the radio caught a breath and let it go. I didn't turn the strobe on. I didn't key the mic. I went back up to my truck and sat with the engine off and my hands on the wheel and listened to the water going about its patient business. If you go out there, if you camp by that edge when the fog comes in, and it's quiet enough that you can hear the tiny snapping of insects on the surface, and if you see them, the lights that don't buzz, that don't hurry, that move like a grid held steady by a hand you can't see, don't call out. Don't try to own it with a video. Don't treat it like a show. Just let them do their work. And if your radio clicks back to you twice, then once, then twice again, don't answer. You don't know what you're saying yes to. I'm writing this because the day I stop noticing them is the day I'll drive home over the bridge without my shoulders tightening. The day I can't feel a tension on me anymore. I don't think I want that. I don't think that's safe either. I'm going to finish this, shut my laptop, pour hot water over the same tired tea bag I've used twice already, and drive down there because that's what I do now. I will park where the rocks remember the shape of the tires. I will keep my hands on the wheel a minute longer than I need to. I will watch the place where the water darkens and wait to see if the sky chooses to show me the part I never get to keep. And if the radio taps, I will pretend I didn't hear. And I will tell myself the engine noise is just the wind. And I will back away from the edge because I know now that the lake and the sky learn from each other. And neither of them needs me to teach them my name. I wasn't going to type this out. I've got a decent job, a mortgage, and a sister who actually worries when I go quiet for a few days. I don't need the kind of attention that comes with saying, hey, something impossible keeps happening to me on a lonely strip of desert highway. But I've been sleeping with the TV on for a month and waking up at 3:17 a.m. like it's a scheduled alarm. My hands shake when I get near my truck, and I've started counting mile markers out loud to keep my breathing steady. I know how that sounds. I just want this off my chest and somewhere outside my head. If you read it and roll your eyes, fine. I'll probably do the same once I hit post. I just need someone else to hold a piece of what's been eating me. I'm a park ranger out in West Texas. Big Bend Ranch State Park. The other Big Bend, a few locals say. Because most people hear Big Bend and think of the national park east of us. I patrol FM 170, also called River Road, between Lajitas and Presidio. It's the kind of place where your radio is your lifeline and your shadow is your only company. The Rio Grande runs to one side, sometimes wide enough to look lazy, sometimes a thin ribbon reflecting the sky like a blade. On the other side, you've got desert hummocks and mesquite, ocotillo like arthritic fingers, and cliffs with names you learn to pronounce slowly because there's no rush out there. The road is narrow and dips hard into arroyos where flash floods have carved the asphalt away from its own shoulder. If you go off in the wrong place, they don't find you because no one's looking. People come out to see the stars, hike Closed Canyon, or drive past the movie set ruins at Contrabando and say they feel like they've slipped into an old western. I used to love it. The light is clean and punishing and honest. The wind has a sound that strips you down to the truth you carry. I'm 35, bad at sleeping in, and have a habit of tapping the steering wheel twice before I turn over the engine. Don't know why. My sister Anna calls it your weird OCD hello. She lives in Alpine, waits tables at the diner with the green roof. She's the one person who can get me to laugh about anything, even when coyotes have been singing like they were taking requests all night. My closest coworker is a ranger named Carla. She's the kind of woman who can patch a blister without taking off her hat and talk a drunk camper down like she's tucking a kid into bed. Dispatch is usually Becky or Ray. Both of them know that when the sun drops behind the mesas and the sky goes from tangerine to bruised, everyone's voice comes up half an octave. You don't notice it until you play back the recordings. I keep a log in the truck, clipped to a board where I write down time, mile marker, and anything worth noting. A stopped car, a broken gate, an unauthorized campfire. The first time I wrote man walking westbound at dusk, it felt like a courtesy to myself. I saw him near mile 41, after the road coils tightly and the river breathes a little wider before pinching into the canyon. He was on the right shoulder, heading toward Presidio, exactly in that hour when the light stops coming from the sky and seems to rise from the ground instead. Pale guy, not sickly, more like unburned, which was strange in late June. He had a brimmed hat tilted forward, the crown shadowing his eyes. Dark shirt with chest pockets, sleeves rolled to the elbow, trousers that didn't fit quite right at the ankle. He was carrying nothing. No water, no pack, no phone in his hand. The air was near 100 degrees even as the sun dropped. I did a slow pass, window down a crack to listen. He didn't wave, didn't thumb for a ride, didn't glare like I'd thrown dust at him. He just kept walking with that measured park ranger gait we all get from too many days on uneven ground. The radio hissed in my ear. I told Becky I had a pedestrian and she asked, "Registered hiker?" "Not on any list." I promised to loop back. He was gone by the time I returned, less than 3 minutes later. I could see the entire stretch and the river was quiet, low and sluggish. He couldn't have scrambled up to the cliffs without me seeing. There was nowhere for him to go. But I've seen weirder. The desert makes you underestimate distances and overestimate time. I wrote the note anyway. 6 p.m., mile 41, M walking W-bound, pale, outdated shirt, no pack. No distress. I saw him again 2 days later, same time, same general area, but eastbound. This time as I approached, he shifted his head just enough for me to see part of his face beneath the brim. He had the kind of jaw that looks like it clenches out of habit. The line of his mouth was set. I remember thinking, that's someone who doesn't complain even when he should. I slowed, leaned toward the glass, and the smell of hot creosote rolled in. My mirror showed a smear of sunlight across the river, the kind of glare that turns water into white metal. He didn't glance up. I radioed in again. Same guy. Brown shirt, looks like. Older uniform? Becky asked me to confirm. I looked harder. The chest pockets were flapped. The stitching looked old. That detail shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. Copy, Becky said. You need a unit? Border Patrol's on Channel 2 if you want a consult. I'll check back, I said. Looks unresponsive to contact. He vanished again between one bend and the next. I drove the same stretch 3 times at 10 under. Nothing. No footprints in the powder along the shoulder. I could have left it there. Chalked it up to heat haze and tired eyes. But I wrote it down and circled the time. You do this job long enough, and you learn the difference between a mirage and a man. The 3rd time was a week later after a small storm had worked itself over the mountains, rattling my aluminum door at home and making the whole neighborhood smell like the inside of a tin roof. Rain in the desert has a way of making old things wake up. Springs darken, bugs lift themselves out of cracks, and the birds argue with a little more emotion. On River Road, puddles sit in the dips like mirrors laid flat. The sky was the yellow-gray color you get right after a storm when the clouds are thin and mean. I was passing the Contrabando movie set ruins, fake wooden fronts standing against real stone, when I saw him again. Same man, same pace, same no wave. The shirt was wrong for this century, not just outdated like a holdover from last year's uniform before they updated the patch. This looked like the pictures in the tiny visitor center at Barton Warnock, where they hang black and whites of early Rangers. High crowns, low brims, stiff collars. A uniform that cared more about making a person look like an idea than letting them move. I pulled over this time. I put on my hat. I tapped the wheel twice without thinking, then killed the engine. The sudden quiet after an engine stops on that road feels like a held breath. I stepped onto the chip-sealed shoulder, the heat rising from it in a sensible little wave. My boots made a dry grit tinge. He didn't turn. He walked toward me like we were both on tracks leading to a single point we couldn't see. "Sir," I called out. My voice sounded too loud and too small at the same time. He stopped. He didn't face me. He tilted just enough that I could see under the brim again. That's when I noticed the name bar on his chest. It looked like bone against the brown. It said De La Cruz. That's my last name. "Sir," I said again, because the radio training makes you repeat yourself when your brain short-circuits. "Are you in need of assistance?" His hand rose in that slow, deliberate way that makes you think of someone underwater. He touched the name bar. He tapped it twice like knocking on a door from the wrong side. Tap, tap, the exact rhythm I do on my steering wheel. Then he lowered his hand and walked past me, the dust he kicked up ghosting over my pant leg. I turned to keep him in sight, adrenaline racing like a dog slipped its chain. "Hey," I said, not a ranger word. "Just human." He didn't give me anything back. I stood there and counted 10 Mississippis with the sun wobbling behind the ridges. He didn't get smaller. The space just swallowed him without making a show of it. When I got back in the truck, my hands were uncooperative. I almost dropped my radio. "Becky," I said, "I need you to check something for me. Past shift logs, personnel records. Anyone named De La Cruz working out here before the patch change?" "De La Cruz?" she said. "Like you?" "Copy." My mouth was dry. "Maybe an older relative. Great uncle. I don't know." "Stand by," she said, and I listened to the keys in her office click like locusts. "Negative," she said after a minute. "No De La Cruz in the roster past or present for BBRSP. Not in the neighboring units either." "You good, Aaron?" I stared at where the man had been. The Ocotillo leaned like tall handwriting scrawled under the light. "Yeah," I lied. "Just wanted to make sure I wasn't seeing a ghost of the payroll." That night at home, my sister showed up with a casserole like I'd been sick. She does that when she senses I'm not saying something. The sky over Alpine had gone that gummy purple that makes the mountains look like cutouts. We ate at my chipped kitchen table. She chewed, watched me not chew, and finally said, "All right, let's have it." I told her the facts. I didn't tell her the part about the name bar, not then. I just said I'd seen a man walking at dusk more than once in an old uniform. She shrugged like she wanted to dismiss it and couldn't quite. "People get weird," she said. "They get heat-baked and stubborn. Maybe he likes the walk. Maybe he crossed somewhere and doesn't want to be noticed." "I'm not asking for explanations," I said. "I'm telling you I keep seeing the same person where the road folds on itself. And he's familiar in a way that makes my teeth hurt." "You want me to tell you it's nothing," she said. "Yes. It's nothing," she said with soft eyes. Then she took my hand across the table like I was 12 and had come home with bloodied knees. "But it's also something. You know the desert better than anyone I know. Just be careful. Day off tomorrow, right? I'll take you to Marfa for a coffee. We'll sit where people pretend the lights are ghosts and watch actual tourists as a palate cleanser." I promised to go. We made a plan to leave at 10, which for me is sleeping in. I slept harder than I expected. At 3:17 a.m., I woke sitting straight up with my heart trying to bail through my ribs. I had the impression of a door opening in my dream. It wasn't violent, just inevitable. The TV screen across the room reflected my face in blue and made the apartment look like it was underwater. I forced myself to breathe in 6s and out 8s like the therapist in Presidio told me to try. The last time a night stuck its hand on my throat and pressed. When morning came, the world looked flatter than it should, like it had been ironed wrong. I made coffee that tasted like hot pennies. I almost called in sick. Instead, I showered, got dressed, tapped the steering wheel twice, and felt stupid for noticing it. I wasn't scheduled to patrol FM 170 that day, but Carla had a tire issue and asked if I could run a quick drive-by from Lajitas to the old wooden bridge site so she could take a long break off the road. "I owe you a burrito," she said. "Bean and cheese, no onions." "I know the rules. I'll collect," I said. The idea of not driving that road made me more anxious than driving it. Avoiding places is how you make them bigger. The radio crackled as I pulled out. Ray was on dispatch, his voice carrying that little grin he always had even when he was sending you to a rattlesnake lecture. Traffic was nothing. A lone white truck with New Mexico plates snorted past me. The driver's arm burnished the color of old pennies. At mile 36, a cluster of bikers rested in the single strip of shade a boulder offered, their helmets set upside down like filled bowls. A Border Patrol SUV sat idling near a cut where the river pinched. The agent inside lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in the way of men who've agreed to share the road but not their day. At mile 41, I didn't see him. Relief felt like the first sip of cold water after you've misjudged your limit. I kept going. At mile 42, where the road drops and then curves hard right around a ridge that pretends to be smaller than it is, my radio hissed a little and cut out for exactly 1 second. This happens sometimes in the dips. But when the audio returned, I heard my own voice, faint, recorded from a previous shift. Pedestrian westbound, it said, tinny like it was underwater or buried in the radio's throat. Then Ray's voice came back real-time saying, "Say again?" I slowed. The road polished itself under my tires. There's a widen out there. Just enough shoulder to stand without getting scraped by a mirror. I pulled over, killed the engine, listened. The sound out there gets inside your ears like sand. I stepped out and the heat pressed around my head like a hand covering my hair. My hat brim made a halo of shade for my face, and then I saw him 20 yards behind me, coming up the shoulder like he'd been stitched there from the beginning of the day. My truck had passed right through where he was and he hadn't been. Now he was. He lifted his hand again, tapped the name bar twice, tap tap, and kept walking. I stepped into him. It wasn't brave. It was panic dressed like action. I moved to block his path and he didn't break stride until he was an arm's length away. Up close, the fabric of his shirt had a texture that looked real enough to catch on something. The name bar did say De La Cruz. The letters weren't stamped. They looked hand-lettered, neat and slightly frail. His skin had that outdoorsman leanness that reads as gaunt in poor light. I thought absurdly that he looked like a photograph of a relative you never knew you had. When he finally raised his head enough for me to see more of his face, I understood why the back of my mind had been chewing itself raw. The creases at the corners of his eyes were mine. The left eyebrow had the same notch where a dog bit me when I was 6. His mouth was my mouth, a familiar line I see every morning when I check if shaving is worth the trouble. It wasn't a mirror, not a funhouse one. He was older by a handful of years, haunted by a handful of things I hadn't weathered yet, but his face was my face. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The word that wanted to come out was no. Not even a pronouncement, more like a prayer, or a negotiation with a reality that had shown up on the wrong day. He tilted his head, and in that slice of shadow under the brim I saw something I didn't want. Apology. A tired, familiar apology, like the one I'd practiced saying to Anna the night our mother died and I didn't make it to the hospital before it happened. He opened his mouth and exhaled without a sound. Then he lifted his hand and pointed down the road at the right-hand curve, the one that looks ordinary until the sun drops and the line between asphalt and air blurs. He held his finger out like he was asking me to look through it to some soft target I couldn't see. Then he walked forward again and brushed my shoulder like a breeze passing through a screen. I turned, followed his finger with my eyes. The asphalt looked like it always does, sun-pitted, oil-dark in patches, a smear of someone's radiator leak like a sentence dragged the wrong way. A wash cuts across there. When it rains hard upstream, the road takes it like a slap. I've seen rocks the size of fists roll through like marbles. But the sky was clear now from horizon to horizon. The only clouds were far beyond the river, hung like someone had pinned cotton to blue glass. I went back to the truck and replayed the dash cam from the last minute. It showed the road. It showed me stepping out. It showed heat shimmer and emptiness. My chest felt like a room with its windows nailed shut. I pulled away carefully, not because of the law, but because whatever had just happened restitched the idea of cause and effect in my brain. I drove the curve at 20. The shadow there was a hair darker than it should have been, although I couldn't have told you why. I made it around and felt a wrongness let go of my shoulders. And then a semi came from the opposite direction like the world had just remembered it owed me that. It had swerved to avoid a rippled place in the asphalt where an earlier flood had undermined the edge. The driver had overcorrected. The trailer whipped once. If I'd been at speed, if I'd taken the curve the way I usually did, we would have traded gods there. Instead, the truck tore past, mirrors almost kissing, and slammed his brakes long enough to lay a two-tone signature on the road. He kept going because sometimes the only way to apologize out there is to get yourself out of the way before the next mistake stacks on top of the one you just made. I pulled over farther down. I counted Mississippis until the number didn't feel like it was doing anything anymore. Then I turned around and drove back to Lajitas with my shoulders up like I expected the sky to come down. "Everything good?" Ray asked because my radio had done that thing again where long silences gather weight. "Copy," I said. "Just a close one." That night, I told Anna everything. The name bar, the face, the pointing, the semi. We sat on my back step and watched the line where town ends smear into the dark where nothing you don't carry exists. She listened the way she listens when a customer lies about their tip. She loves me enough to want a rational explanation, but not enough to give me one I can't use. So, she said, you saved your life. I don't know that, I said. I don't know anything except I've been seeing the same person whose face looks like mine and whose shirt says my name. And my dash cam doesn't want to call me a witness. Did you look up old accidents? She asked. On that road, rangers, border patrol, civilians, anything. Becky did, I said. She sent me a link to a story about a ranger in the 70s who vanished near the same mile marker. Different last name. They treated it like a cautionary tale. Don't walk alone. Radio frequently. That kind of thing. There was a flood that week. They never found a body. What if it's like a loop, she said. Like the road keeps playing back the same hurt until somebody listens. Great, I said. I'm the world's saddest rerun. She swatted my arm. You know what I mean. I know, I said. I just don't know what this version wants. Or if I'm in it or watching it or both. I'm serious, she said. What if you staying slow on that curve unwound something you don't even get to understand? What if that's the point? Not to know just to not die? I like not dying, I said. I'd like to keep doing it. The next week, Carla asked me to run a night patrol because she'd pulled double shifts and the sun had been making her melt. I said yes because saying no felt like letting the road get bigger again. The desert at night is not the same place as during the day. It's like someone draped a black fabric over everything and then lit it from the inside. The stars out there come down to the horizon and hang like seeds in thick melon flesh. The road gets a shine to it, not wet, not dry, something else. Animals appear where there were none 5 minutes before. Jackrabbits, a ringtail like a bandit, a silent owl hunting the little brave doomed. I drove with my window down to hear the night do its delicate work. I radioed in a fire someone had left smoking and watched its ember pulse once and die. I waved at a couple in a Jeep who looked dazed by their own vacation. At mile 41, there he was, as if he lived there and I was the one passing through. He walked with that steady resignation, the walking of someone who knows the distance is the point even if the point is dumb. I slowed but didn't stop. He didn't look up. He was the darkness wearing my face. I kept waiting for the pattern to declare itself. That's what kills you out there. Not rattlesnakes, not any nonsense human terror, just your brain's hunger for pattern where there might not be one, and the desert's indifference to feeding you. Some people fill the silence with radio chatter, some fill it with music. I started talking out loud like a guy with a passenger. I told him about the time Anna and I used to bike down Cemetery Road after school because we liked how the wind made our shirts hammer our backs. I told him about the kid at Closed Canyon who slipped and caught himself so quickly. No one but me saw the alternate timeline. I told him how our mother smelled like hand lotion and a pot of beans and how I still sometimes look up at 5 p.m. and want to dial a number that belongs to no one now. He didn't answer because he didn't have to. I wasn't talking to the man on the shoulder anymore, not really. I was talking to a part of me that refused to break the way it would be convenient to break. A month in, I did something I'm not proud of. I brought my phone out and tried to get a video of him. I told myself it was for my sanity and for proof in case my sanity was cheaper than I believed. I set the phone in the dash cradle, angled it. I watched the little red dot blink. I drove slow. He appeared in the frame where the road tilts and cranes its neck toward Presidio. He moved like a person filmed at 24 frames per second in a world that had shifted to 23 and a half step off everyone else's timing. I kept him there, dead center like I was framing him for interview. I passed him and pulled over to capture him in the side mirror. He was in it, smaller now, still coming. I stood very still in the cab, barely breathing, wise suddenly to the truth that the air was not any more mine than it had to be. What the phone captured later, when I played it back, was a neat video of an empty Texas road fading into the kind of blue that makes you feel more spiritual than you are. It caught the hiss of the radio as Ray asked if I wanted bottled water brought out to me like some polite insult. It caught my breath. It caught the night. It did not catch him. The mirror showed the highway and a smear of trees that could have been a smear of trees anywhere. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and thought about how some stories never consent to be told by anything but a person's witness. Instruments, even cheap ones, want the world to be measurable. The desert wants to be believed or left alone. A week after that, a tourist in a rental sedan flagged me down near the overlook that makes people cry without knowing why. She was 70 if she was a day, white hair like a cloud that forgot to drift, sunglasses with enough tint to pretend her eyes didn't get tired. Her husband in the passenger seat was the peculiar shade of people who think sunscreen is a rumor. She asked me in that gentle, out-of-state voice, "Is there a ranger memorial around here? We saw someone walking back there." She gestured vaguely toward Lajitas, in an old uniform. My father was a park ranger back east. I always stopped for monuments. "No memorial," I said. "Not official." "Oh," she said. "Well, maybe it was a reenactment. Do you have those like the battlefields? We saw one once in Virginia. They were very serious." "No reenactments," I said, and the words felt like a door closing politely. She looked disappointed but also relieved, as if reenactments belonged to a world she understood. They drove off with that careful lack of acceleration that betrays people who distrust rented engines. I stood and watched their taillights shrink until the road made a snake of them, and then a thought. I didn't think I was the only one anymore. He wasn't only for me. Or maybe he was for the place and I was an accessory. Carla asked me if I wanted to swap routes for a while. "You're starting to talk like a man who sees sun halos around every light bulb," she said, half joke, half medicine. I told her no, not yet. I needed to know if the thing was going to end or if we were just going to become two parts of the same picture. At 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, I woke to the sound of gravel in my bed. No, that's not right. It was the memory of gravel, as if my dream had backed a truck up to my ear and dumped a load of road into it. I sat up and realized I'd been crying. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind that pools in your ears and dries sticky. I had dreamt the curve. I had dreamt driving it at speed and feeling the front right wheel kiss air where the road had been undermined one rain too many. I had dreamt my hands refusing the wheel's demand. I had dreamt the drop into the wash not as a crash but as an arrival. There was relief in it. The way your body surrenders to gravity is a kind of mercy if you allow it. When I washed my face, I looked at my left eyebrow and touched the notch like it was new. I made coffee strong enough to encourage my ancestors. I drove out early before even the sun had recovered its sense of time. The eastern sky was all promise, no delivery yet. At mile 41 he was there, but this time, for the first time, he had stopped. He stood facing the river, his hands at his sides like an obedient child. I pulled over so fast the seatbelt cut across my chest and made me think of being held down for my own good. I stepped out and the cool air brushed my eyelashes. He didn't move. I stood next to him, not in front of him, and looked where he looked. The river moved with exaggerated care, pretending to be a different river while it was being watched. Mist sat in low bowls over the flats like it had nowhere else to go. "Okay," I said, finally saying it to him, not to what he meant. "I'm here." His head turned a fraction. The brim shadowed his eyes like always, but I didn't need to see them to know that some part of his face had softened. He lifted his hand and touched the name bar, not tapping this time. A slow press. Then he reached up to the metal brim of his hat and tilted it back a hair, enough that the dawn laid a small, unkind ribbon of light across his features. It was my face, yes, older like before, but beyond the aging, there was sand on one cheek, a nick at the chin, and a kind of stillness in the muscles of the mouth that you only get in one of two places. In the mirror when you're working very hard not to cry, or in a coffin when someone else has done that work for you. He lowered the brim again and turned to the road. He pointed at the curve. "No," I said, surprising myself with the word. It had come back, same shape, different size. "I heard you," he didn't nod. He didn't need to. He started walking again, westbound, his elbows not swinging the way most people's would. I matched his pace for a few steps like I was trying to walk into the same day. My footfalls made noise. His didn't. After 10 steps I couldn't pretend anymore and stopped. He kept going until the light made him simply one more shape in a place full of shapes pretending to be nothing. I went to work. I told Ray because he deserved to know that my radio had been acting up around mile 42, and to keep that in mind if someone needed a reach. He said, "Copy," in a voice that meant he understood the layers under the words. People talk about small towns like they're nosy. Sometimes they're kind. A tourist stalled out at the pull-off by Closed Canyon. I jumped her battery and received the kind of gratitude that makes you feel embarrassed in both directions. On my way back, I saw a sheriff's unit pulled over near the curve. Sheriff Ortega leaned against his cruiser, hands in his pockets like he had apologized to them and they'd forgiven him. He's a big, gentle man who looks like a villain casting directors would ruin by giving him lines he'd refuse to say. "You drive this curve like a prayer," he said when I rolled to a stop. "Maybe I just like being alive," I said. "Like a prayer," he repeated, and tapped his own steering wheel twice with one knuckle. I didn't ask if he knew why he did it. Some things don't stand up well under lights. When I got home that night, I took the log from the truck and read it like it belonged to someone else. The first entry, "Man westbound," looked like a joke I hadn't learned how to laugh at. The subsequent circles around the same hour made a shape that could have been seen as obsession if you didn't think about the alternative. There was a time once when people built cairns beside routes that had no markers, stacking stones to say, "I passed here. It didn't kill me." Sometimes that's all we have. 2 weeks and an unlucky poker night later, I was dispatched to check on a missing hiker who hadn't returned to her rental by sunset. She'd left her route on a napkin at a gas station, because kindness is a kind of superstition. You leave breadcrumbs in case the sky is hungry. Her car sat alone at the trailhead like a dog waiting on a porch. I walked the canyon with my light low because shadows lie less to you when you're not insulting them with too much visibility. I found her sitting on a ledge she hadn't meant to climb to. She was embarrassed and thirsty. We walked out together slow. On the way back, she asked, "Do you believe in signs?" "I believe in mile markers," I said. "Not what I meant," she said, smiling. "On the drive in, I think I saw someone." "It doesn't matter. You're here now. Thank you." "It matters," I said. "An old ranger," she said, walking like he was counting invisible steps. My grandfather moved like that. We didn't talk anymore about signs. She gripped my forearm once briefly, like maybe she knew there was a piece of me out there in more than one sense. I radioed the safe return and heard Becky exhale between words. That night I dreamed of water under the road. Not flood, something gentler, creeping, patient. The kind of water that erodes rules, not stone. It was the sound water makes in culverts. A formal sound, practical, purposeful. I woke at 3:17 and realized the number had become a ritual, not a visitation. I stood at my sink and drank tap water that tasted like a memory of metal. I stared at my face and decided not to decide anything. You can start to think you've made peace with a thing because it stops surprising you. That piece is paper thin. 3 days ago, near dusk, I was coming up on the curve when a minivan, California plates, bikes on the back, one of the taillights held in with clear tape, came at it too hard. They had tucked themselves into a day that had lasted longer than planned. The van hit the dip, bottomed out, and the driver panicked. He jerked the wheel and clipped the shoulder. The car started that heartbreaking, slow slide that looks like it will stop before the drop but doesn't. I don't know how I got my truck across the road as quickly as I did without making the problem worse. I know only that when I stopped, the van's front wheels hung off like shoes before a cliff. I saw 3 faces inside. A woman in the passenger seat whispering something over and over. A kid in the back holding a stuffed rabbit by the ears. The driver sweating light, hands locked like a man holding a door against water. "Don't move," I said, and my voice was the wrong mix of gentle and order. "Put it in park. Everybody breathe. You're okay. Everyone's okay." They believed me, not because I sounded convincing, but because some people are good at following hope if you hand it to them properly. I took a strap from the back, ran it around their rear axle, and hooked it to my hitch. The father kept saying, "I'm sorry," over and over, like every choice he'd ever made suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. I told him to stop saying that. I told him I've heard better apologies and worse, and that none of them ever moved a wheel. We breathed together. I asked the woman to tell me a secret about the kid. She laughed wetly and said he refuses to eat peas unless each one has a friend pea touching it on the fork. The kid said politely, "It's true." I asked the father to tell me what city they were going to. He told me Terlingua, and I said, "Not a city," and he said, "I know," and that cracked something light into the moment. The strap took the weight like it had been waiting all its life for this. My truck grunted. The van shuddered. The road, very reluctantly, returned a bit of itself to us. We pulled them back the 6 inches they needed to realign with this world. Then they rolled onto safe ground, and everything that had been holding its breath started breathing loudly. We stood in the road afterward, hands shaking like we'd drunk too much coffee. The woman hugged me in that impulsive way that city people swear they don't have anymore and then do. When their bodies remember they are animals who like to live. The man pressed a wad of cash at me that I did not take. The kid thought the dip was fun and asked if I was a cowboy. I told him no, just a person in a hat. They drove off slowly. The taillight tape glowed like a tiny neon reminder to be humble. When they'd gone, I sat on my truck's tailgate and let my head hang between my knees. I felt someone step up beside me and I didn't look because I already knew who it was. He stood there in the last of the day like someone carved out of nothing and dressed in a story. He lifted his hand. He tapped the name bar twice, tap, tap. Then he set his palm lightly on my shoulder. It was the faintest pressure, the suggestion of contact. Like the moment before a comforting touch lands or the moment after a world gives one back and you aren't sure which. I looked up finally and threw every rule I had into the wind. "Thank you," I said. He did not tip his hat. He did not say, "Be careful," in my voice. He just turned and began walking again, westbound as the sun slid behind the ridge and the road went from being made of asphalt to being made of memory. I watched until I couldn't tell where he ended and the dark began. The radio hissed. Then Ray said something about a stray dog near the river crossing, and the world resumed itself like a record that had only skipped for a beat. I know there are explanations that would make some of you feel better. Heat mirages, misfiring neurons, a trauma I haven't admitted to myself, the border playing tricks with jurisdictional radio, the mind looking for itself where it can. I'm not allergic to any of those. I've seen enough to know that most hauntings are just rooms holding on to the shape of a person too stubborn to leave. Maybe I'm a room. Maybe the road is. I can tell you this, the dash cam still never catches him. The phone has decided to save battery life whenever he appears, which I respect. Tourists mention him without committing to the detail like a superstition. A bypassed word. Carla has started tapping her steering wheel twice as a joke and then stopped doing it as a joke. Anna told me last night that she saw a man who looked like me walking past the diner window, not looking in. She stepped outside with a coffee she pretended to deliver to a table and he was gone. She said, "If you're dead in a week, I refuse to attend your funeral. I'll sit at home and yell at your picture." I told her I expect her to attend so she can make fun of the flowers. I don't know what the end of this is. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe it's a long, slow bend. And the best I can do is keep the wheel easy and the eyes forward. This morning at 3:17 a.m., I woke up without the galloping heart. I lay there and listened to the kind of silence that feels like the desert invented it. I pictured the curve. I pictured the man. I pictured us both walking the same shoulder in different drafts of the day. In an hour, I'll get in my truck. I'll tap the wheel twice. I'll drive out to mile 41 and beyond. If he's there, I'll match my breathing to his footfalls like a metronome meant to teach me time, not music. If he's not, I'll count the absence the way a person counts the missing at a table. I'll answer calls about lost hats and strange noises and fires that shouldn't have started themselves. I'll wave at Border Patrol and pretend I don't hear the engines from the other side of the river when the night has fewer rules. And when the sun drops and the road goes that color that makes you think of old photographs with their corners rounded and their subject stubbornly alive, I'll take that curve like a prayer, slow enough to hear what the road says with its throat and its teeth. I want to tell you there's a lesson. I want to say, I saw myself and I learned to be brave, or I was warned and now I am safe. But the truth the desert hands out is different. It's smaller and harder and it fits in your pocket like a stone that has the patience to outlast your wishes. The truth is I keep seeing a man on FM 170. He wears an older uniform. He walks at dusk like he's on duty in a place that does not require his presence, and would not stop him if he lay down and became one of its shapes. He has my face. He taps my name. He points at a curve in the road like it's a question I will keep answering even when I'm not. Some nights when the wind is so soft it couldn't cut bread, I think I hear him behind me. His steps precise as a metronome measuring a song I haven't learned yet. I turn and there's no one. The road looks like a decision. The river looks like a way out. I get back in the truck. I tap the wheel, once, twice. Then I go where the highway tells me. And I try not to look too long at the place where the shoulder thins and the drop doesn't announce itself until you've already chosen. If you drive that road, slow down. Not because of me, because the place wants you to. Watch the edges, listen. If you see someone walking, pale, hat low, hands quiet, do me a favor. Don't try to talk to him. Don't film him. Just pass like you're passing yourself 5 years from now when you think you'll be better and you won't. Not exactly. Keep your eyes on the asphalt. Keep your hands loose, ready. And if after you've gone by, You feel the urge to tap the wheel twice for no good reason, go ahead and do it. It's a small prayer, the kind the desert might accept if you don't ask for an answer in return. And if at 3:17 a.m. you wake to the sound of water under a road, count yourself lucky. It's only the world reminding you that everything important keeps moving under us whether we see it or not. I'm not the kind of person who posts online about work, but last week I caught myself staring at the shoreline from my porch, whispering the same sentence over and over like I was trying to convince the lake it wasn't true. I realized I was talking to the water. That felt like a line I shouldn't cross alone. I'm putting this out there because I want one memory of it to exist somewhere that isn't soaked into the mud. My name's Lane. I'm a senior ranger based around Caddo Lake. If you know the area, you already know it doesn't look like most lakes. It's more like a maze that forgot it was supposed to be arranged. Cypress trees rise out of the water like pillars holding up the heat. Moss drapes everything, and when the wind is light, the strands barely move. The channels are narrow in places and then spread out into glassy, shallow pans. We patrol the public sections with flat-bottom boats and john boats with mud motors that scream like chainsaws. In summer, the air is a wet shirt you can't peel off. At night, the reflection of the moon gets chopped into pieces by floating mats of water hyacinth that you swear weren't there an hour ago. I've been at Caddo long, enough to grow superstitions and then forget which ones were jokes. Some days you tap the aluminum hull twice before push-off. Some days you avoid certain routes because they look like knuckles, and somehow that seems important. We all do the easy version of coping, laugh too loud at the bait shop, complain too much about visitors who block the narrow ramps, treat every story like an exaggeration, even as we annotate our maps with pencil notes that say, "Avoid 60 yards south of Green Buoy," without explaining why. On paper, my job is maintenance and safety. Trail inspections, rescue coordination, visitor assistance, gear checks. The gear part is where this starts. Radios. We issue them, we log them, we baby them because they're our lifeline when a storm comes up fast and the water turns into a floor of nails. We use standard VHF channels most boats can pick up if they're trying. But our ranger units have a couple of encrypted codes and a distress tone we only trigger in true emergencies. The distress tone is an ugly sound like somebody strangling a gull, and it's hard to mistake for anything else. Even people who hear it for the first time flinch. 6 weeks ago, our rookie ranger, Maya, came in off a solo patrol with mud all up the back of her calves and a look I recognized. The one you get when you can't figure out if what happened is small and embarrassing or big and dangerous. She hovered at my doorway like a kid who skipped something in a story. "You ever heard the number 8233 used as a code?" she asked. I was elbow deep in the equipment locker and didn't look up right away. 8233. Not as a code. We got our standard 10 codes. 82 is subject clear. 83 is advise, but not together like that. Where'd you hear it? On Channel 6, around Dogfish. It sounded like someone was reading it off between bursts of static. I wiped my hands on a rag and turned to her, expecting the tell. New rangers mishear stuff. The lake is a chorus when the weather's shifting. Oil rigs and private radios and those weird novelty microphones fishermen use that make you sound like a robot. Were they asking for help? No, she said. I didn't hear the distress tone. It was just that number. I wrote it down. She pulled a damp notebook from her pocket and showed me where she'd scrawled 8233 in pencil, hard enough to tear the paper. I told her we'd probably picked up bleed from a nearby parish using their own codes. I told her it happened. I patted the air. It was nothing. But that night in the office, I flipped through old logbooks, the ones we keep in dented binders in case the computers crash. We've standardized nearly everything, but the old days were messy. Different supervisors, different abbreviations. I found a yellowed incident report from 1977 with a smudged pencil note in the margin. Use 8233 if compromised. Compromised could mean a lot. A busted radio, a cut handline, poachers. I looked for a key that would explain the note and found none. The report was about a missing boater who had, according to a deputy's handwriting that leaned like it was trying to fall off the page, most likely sunk under weight of gear. The case was closed 2 days later. Body recovered 2 miles down a flooded channel. The man's radio had never been found. There's a logic I follow when I patrol. Move slow into narrower places. Listen before you assume you're alone. Don't disturb a logjam if you're not prepared for what lives inside it. I added a new rule in my head after I read that report. Write down what doesn't fit. So I wrote 8233 on a note card and stuck it in the corner of my windshield so it would be a mosquito gnawing at me. 2 days later, when the humidity had the clouds pressed low like they were tired, I heard our distress tone while I was idling past an island of cypress knees that looked like teeth from the side. It came from my radio loud and crisp and followed by a whisper that made no sense. 7-1 red. I grabbed the mic. Unit 3, copy distress duration. Crackle, then nothing. I waited, engines rolling at a burp, knowing better than to gun it blind toward a sound. A minute passed. Someone on the sheriff's frequency asked for a location on a traffic stop back on the highway. Normal life thriving just past the wall of trees, and still my distress light blinked on the console like a heartbeat. It stopped. Then I heard it again, softer, but this time it didn't sound like it was coming through the speaker. It sounded like it was behind me. I turned. The boat's wake repeated itself in the chopped reflection of the branches. The sound was wrong in the air. I thumbed the mic anyway. Unit 3 to base, I said. Did we have a test of tone? Rosa was on duty at the station. She never wastes words. Negative, she said. You okay, Lane? Copy, might have been bleed. I don't know why I said it. It didn't sound like bleed. It sounded like the tone had been swallowed by mud and was trying to push up through it. 7-1 red wasn't one of our codes, but we keep old maps with our hand-drawn marks of previous buoy positions when floods move them. On one of the oldest, faded even after I traced it over the years, there's a tiny X with the note R71 old red marker. That marker fell or sank sometime before I started. No one ever bothered to pull it out. The channel is shallow there, a fan of roots under 2 to 3 feet of water. I don't like bringing the boat close because the prop chews the bottom and stirs up black water that smells like pennies. I approached anyway. The surface over that spot looks like it remembers. The reflection shifts slower there. The trees lean toward each other like they're whispering. I cut the motor and pulled in the last few yards until we were kissing the cypress knees. The foam from the wake pushed against the knees and then sucked back as if the lake swallowed a breath. I took a boat hook and nudged around in the water. The top foot is a kind of skin. Break it, and you feel the cool underneath, and then if you push farther, it's like your wrist gets hugged. The hook snagged something that didn't flex like a branch. The metal transmitted that little vibration your bones recognize before your brain does. I leaned and felt the boat lean with me and heard the subtle gulp of water as it shifted around the hull. When I pulled up, black threads came with the hook like wet hair clinging to it, and held for a long, stubborn second. Then something gave and I brought up a rectangle coated in slime and silkweed. It wasn't until the sun blinked out from behind a slow cloud that I saw what it was. A handheld radio, the kind we haven't used since the early 90s, with a cracked red button on the side and a gray rubber antenna now flopped over like a wilted stem. The clip at the back was still attached to a strip of rotten canvas. I cupped it like it might leak. Water dribbled out of the speaker mesh. It weighed more than it should for plastic. The brand was one we used to buy from a guy 2 towns over. The guy with the wandering eye who used to remind us to keep the rubber boots on the chargers clean, like a mantra. I was about to set it at my feet when the speaker squelched and I felt the vibration in my palm. I didn't press any buttons, I swear. The sound came up like someone had just turned a volume knob on the lake itself. A voice clipped by age or its trip through the water said, 8233, and then a faint echo of our distress tone wobbled and died. I sat there with my mouth open like a fool until the voice was gone. The old radio went quiet. The lake went back to pretending it was just water. I put it into an empty dry bag because that's what you do when your brain tries to split into 2. The part that wants to run, and the part that wants to label and store. Back at the station, Maya met me at the dock with iced coffees she'd picked up from the gas station. She talks when she's nervous. She was talking now about a guy who'd tried to pay for a day pass with a gift card from a hardware store, and then got mad when she wouldn't accept it. I set the dry bag on the tailgate of my truck and unzipped it like I was showing a kid a snake. Tell me what number you heard, I said. She repeated it. I pulled out the old radio. This said it. She reached to touch it and pulled her hand back like it might be hot. We don't have an official radio tech, but everyone agrees that if something is broken and made with wires, you should call Eric at the boatyard. He fixes lower units and welds aluminum, and he's the only one who remembers the old models we inherited from constables and donations. He met us in his shop late that afternoon, sweat making a V on his shirt. He put the radio on a towel like it might leave a stain. He squinted at the casing and whistled. "Vintage," he said. "Where's its battery?" "It was in the lake," I said. He flipped it over, pried a corroded latch with a thin screwdriver and slid the back off. The battery inside was bloated and split like a rotten fruit. Black water dripped onto the towel. "No way this held a charge," he said. "No way." He checked the leads. "These would crumble if you looked at them hard." "You're not messing with me." I told him I wasn't. He wiped his hands, looked at me, and then looked at the radio again like it might try to run. "You're sure it said something?" I was sure. He plugged a bench power supply into the contacts out of curiosity more than method. He played with the knobs. Once or twice the speaker hissed like a yawn and died. He put it back on the towel and reached for his cigarettes. He doesn't smoke inside, but he pulled one out anyway and tapped it on the bench as if the cigarette could knock an answer loose. When you work with a place long enough, you stop telling people things that make you sound like the place has a personality. I didn't want to say it, but I did. It felt like it was still connected to something, I told him. He raised an eyebrow. Like the lake was its battery. Maya laughed because there's only so much tension a young person can hold. "My mom says this lake is a recorder," she said. "She says it remembers. You put a boat in it, the lake knows you put a boat in it. You drop a radio, it knows where you dropped it. That's why the fishermen always come back to the exact same spot they swear is lucky. The lake remembers where they put their luck." Eric nodded like he didn't want to agree but couldn't think of something funnier. He bagged the radio in a fresh plastic sack and handed it to me. "If it talks again, bring it to me while it's talking," he said. "I don't care if it's 2 a.m. We logged it as recovered property and stuck it in the evidence locker we keep mostly for fishing poles and wallets. I went out at sunset because that's my favorite time, even though it's also when mistakes happen. The air cools by 2 degrees and you feel brave, and that's when you misjudge how fast that squall is coming. I eased past the bait shop where old men like to argue about whether catfish taste better in May or October. They waved. One of them, Clyde, shouted, "Storm tonight. You'd be smart to stash it early." I saluted with 2 fingers and kept going. Dark clouds were piled up on the horizon like a parade that was tired of waiting. I told myself I was out there to check campsites, but I picked a line that took me back by the old red marker's ghost. I didn't stop. I just listened. Around the first island, where the trees lean as if they want to eavesdrop on the public boat launch, I got a call from Rosa that a couple had reported their teenage son overdue from kayaking a side channel. I know the look of parents who've done the math and don't like the answer. I headed that way, cutting across a flat where the water is an inch deep over drowned grass. The prop dragged a little like a spoon through stew. A few minutes into the search pattern, my radio went to static so loud I had to yank the volume knob down. Then came the distress tone, but this time it wasn't clean. It sounded like it had been recorded onto tape, then recorded again until the edges of the sound had borrowed dust. Then a voice, "Kayak yellow. Last seen Big Cypress blowdown. Advise." I called it in, breath doing that stupid thing it does where it tries to run faster than the rest of you. "Copy, I'm approaching the blowdown. Advise if parents have line of sight." Rosa's voice came through steady. "Negative. They lost him around the first bend. The trees at the blowdown knit together so tight even sunlight gives up. I killed the engine and drifted." "Jake," I called, not knowing if that was his name but choosing one anyway, like you might catch it on a hook. "You okay?" Nothing but the drip of the first big drops hitting all around and a noise like wringing a huge wet towel. I heard the crackle again, and then a small scuff in the speaker, like fabric against plastic. 8233, the old voice said, except I hadn't brought the old radio. I checked my own handheld and watched as the signal meter jumped and fell. Maya, somewhere 2 channels over, said, "Lane, I'm on your 6, which meant she'd come out without waiting for me to call for backup. Good. I don't like the blowdown alone. I told her to keep her distance and listen. Sometimes a kayak hits a hidden stump and a kid goes for an involuntary swim and then gets embarrassed and sits quiet. I stood to get more height, grabbed a cypress branch and shifted us 10 feet forward. The bow nosed into a little pocket of calm water, and I saw it. A yellow kayak wedged under 2 overlapping roots upside down. The nose lifted like it was trying to take a breath. No kid, no paddle. The hollow underneath the kayak was full of leaves that had drifted into a kind of mulch. The way it sat wrong made my neck feel tight. Maya's boat slid in behind me. She shut down and pulled close enough that we could touch. "I'll go in," she said, stripping down to her shorts. "No," I said, sharper than I meant. I didn't want her to put her hands into that black water where you can't see your knuckles. I shifted my long pole into the debris under the hull and lifted. The kayak rotated, slow and reluctant. The water under it belched a bubble of stink, no kid. I swept my pole through the pocket and felt it bump something soft, then a hard clunk. I hooked it and pulled. A paddle. No, not a paddle. A paddle blade tied to something else with twine. I broke the surface. It was a piece of driftwood carved with someone's pocket knife in careful block letters. Jake 2021. The paddle blade had been attached after. I looked at Maya, she looked at me. Her mouth thinned. "This is wrong," she said. We found the boy 15 minutes later, 100 yards downstream, clinging to a snag and crying in a way that made me want to pretend I wasn't there, so he could save face with his own pride. We hauled him in, he apologized, we said the things you say. He'd overturned, lost the paddle, tried to stand, found the bottom an elastic thing that wanted his shoes, panicked, then caught the snag. He wore a bright orange whistle, which he admitted he hadn't blown because he didn't want to make it worse. I told him the whistle was the opposite of worse, and he nodded like maybe he believed me. We returned him to shore where his parents cracked in half with relief and then immediately reassembled into anger. This is normal. This is how it's supposed to go. As soon as my feet hit gravel, my radio hissed and said quiet and clear, "Advise." Nothing else. Then silent. The storm that had threatened got bored and drifted east. That night, my sister, Carly, dropped by my place with groceries and the intention to clean the breach in my sliding screen door, because she's decided I don't fix small things fast enough. She teaches 4th grade in town and has the eyes of someone who sees trouble 5 seconds before it happens. We drank beer on the porch while the frogs tuned up. I told her about the old radio like it was a funny find, and then I told her about my radio speaking in numbers that didn't belong to it. She's not easily rattled. She's also been around long enough to know when I'm telling a story, and when I'm trying to unpack a thing I can't hold by myself. "You think somebody's messing with you?" she asked. "An app, a trick?" I've had that thought. You can make a phone pretend to be a lot of things if you're clever and bored. "Maybe," I said. "But it's wrong even if it's a prank. It's like the voice is old. I don't know how else to say it. It's heavy with something." She smiled at that. "You mean you heard a ghost?" I swatted a mosquito. "No, I mean I heard the place remember." We sat in the old metal chairs with their springy backs and watched little flashes blink over the water. Fireflies gather in certain trees and not others. For reasons that feel like gossip no one shares. The phone buzzed on my knee. It was a text from Eric. "Got back to shop after dinner. Your radio chirped twice in the bag. No power supply attached." "No kidding. Come by tomorrow." There was a picture attached of the radio on his towel under the fluorescent light. The bag was fogged. The towel had a wet corner like the radio was sweating. In the morning I walked into his shop and it smelled like hot aluminum and gear oil. He had the radio out again with an improvised jumper rig he insisted was not providing anything, just measuring. He showed me a multimeter readout that wavered like tiny breath. "There's an induced something," he said, annoyed that the word current felt like a concession. "It spikes when the humidity spikes. It spikes when I tap the casing. It spikes more when I set it on the concrete floor. You still want me to tell you it's bad wiring? It's bad wiring." He grinned in defeat. "It's also doing something it shouldn't do." The next week the incidents continued in a pattern I couldn't ignore. 6 moments I recorded in my notebook so I wouldn't start blending them together. 1. Maya and I were tying new reflective tape to a buoy that keeps migrating. The tape keeps the weekenders from cutting the turn at night and planting themselves on a stump bed. The tape is bright as fish scales in the spotlight beam. While we were peeling old adhesive off with a pocket knife, our radios whispered in unison so soft I thought it was wind. 8233, the voice said, not asking, just placing. The words were inside the speaker but felt like they were in my own mouth too. Maya flinched. "Stop it," she said, as if the lake cared what she wanted. 2. Rosa called to say a houseboat had gone adrift untied from a private dock. The owner swore he had tied it, but also he had been drinking, and also the knot he described was not a knot I would bet a boat's weight on. We found the houseboat bumping against an island of hyacinth, as if it had decided to anchor itself. There was a radio on its kitchen counter tuned to a weather band that we don't use for our traffic. The little green light on it blinked once, and then we heard the tape bleach tone. "Wind advisory," an old woman's recorded voice said. Then a hiss like someone sighing. The owner looked at us like we'd done it. I looked back at him like he should fix his knots, but I wrote it down. 3. A deputy called late asking if we'd run a light along a stretch where a pickup had missed a turn and wedged itself into a cypress root network like a coin into a jacket lining. We did. While the ambulance crew checked the driver for shock, our radios popped and laid down a short-coded phrase we haven't used in my career: Red 01 floodgate. The deputy, a quiet guy named Wynn, turned his head like a dog hearing a phone ring in a movie. "Where'd that come from?" he asked. I shrugged. He chewed his cheek. "My granddad used to say that, Red 01, back when he worked with the old water control." He shaded his eyes with his hand even though it was night. They called the wooden gate at the spillway Red 01 before they replaced it. The wood swelled when the humidity went up. He said the gate talked. 4. I took a day off because you can't sit under the humidity all your life and expect your thinking to stay dry. Carly and I drove to a diner out on the highway where the waitress calls everyone the same nickname. I left my radio at home like a sinner trying to skip church to see if the preacher still has power. The minute we slid into a vinyl booth, my phone vibrated with a voicemail from an unknown number. I let it go because I wanted to taste my eggs in peace. Later in the parking lot, I listened, static. Then, Lane. My name fell out of the speaker with the weight of something you don't drop. I looked at the call info. It said the voicemail had been left 33 years ago. I didn't tell Carly that part until the next day because I wanted to sleep once like a person who just ate pie. 5. Around dusk, a family flagged us from a rental skiff because their 5-year-old daughter had found a walkie-talkie in the shallows near their picnic spot and it had made the bad sound. The kid held the little plastic radio with the seriousness of a scientist. It was the kind you buy to talk between the yard and the kitchen. It had a sticker of a dinosaur on the back. "It beeped," she said. It said a number. It said 33. Her mom nodded, embarrassed. "We tried to turn it off, but it wasn't even on," she said, showing me the empty battery compartment. The kid stared at the walkie-talkie and then at the water with a frown older than 5. "It said my name," she added, almost like a question. "Are you sure?" her dad asked gently. She was sure. 6. A message came over our ranger band at 4 a.m. when I was awake because dawn pushes on me like someone at my door. The voice was my voice saying, "Advise," in the slightly command-drained way I say it when I want the other end to fill in details. I sat up on the couch and stared at the radio on the coffee table like it had grown a face. I keyed the mic without knowing why and said, "Copy," to the dark. By then I had pulled all our old logs from the 70s into a stack on my desk, and I checked the lock on the evidence locker twice a day, like I was afraid the radio would crawl out. The logs are dull when you want them to be exciting. Notes about trash removal and tires left in ditch banks and school groups visiting. But each year has a few entries that get told slow. One from 1979 said a patrol boat had gone out after a storm to check downed lines and never returned. The next day, parts of the hull washed up. The radio was logged as missing. Next to that entry, someone scrawled, "Use 8233 if comp." That's the same year that the old red marker was officially removed from the chart. Same week. The lake was full of new logs where old ones had been. I tried to convince myself the coincidence was just that. It was Maya who finally said the thing I had not wanted to build with words. We were trimming brush around a dock so visitors wouldn't snare their fishing lines in it, and the sun was trying to blind us through the gap between 2 trees. She said, "What if the number is a grave marker, like for radios? What if they marked the place where they lost one by saying 8233? I shook my head because I didn't want to go where she was going. "We don't bury radios, Maya," I said. Then immediately pictured the one in the evidence bag, the one that had been somehow preserved in the cold black under the red marker. She saw my face change. "We don't intend to bury radios," she corrected. When the next front finally pushed into our heat and sent a line of rain across the lake that looked like a gray curtain, I decided I needed to go back to the old red marker spot with more than a boat hook. I told Rosa what I planned in vague terms, and she looked at me for a long beat that said she knew any detail I spared her was deliberate. She told me to take someone with me. I asked Maya because she was the one the number had first counted. She met me at dawn with a thermos and a nervous joke about alligators. Eric heard what we were planning because I'm not good at keeping my mouth shut when I'm trying to convince myself what I'm doing is rational. He showed up uninvited with a length of weighted line, a handheld sonar unit, and a promise to turn back if I told him to. I didn't tell him to. We ran light because the channels were choked with branches and even the big boats were leaving a wake of leaves like breadcrumbs. The lake smelled like wet wood and minerals. We idled down to the coordinates I'd marked where the sound had seemed loudest the first time. I killed the engine. The quiet after you kill a motor is not quiet. It's loud with insects and drip and far-off voices bouncing in weird ways off the water. The surface was a mirror interrupted by the rain's afterthoughts. "Sonar first," Eric said. He dropped the transducer in and watched the little screen. "There," he said after a second. "See that? Hard shapes under 3 feet of soft." The screen showed 3 bright returns clustered like teeth. Not logs look softer. These were something else. "I don't like that," Maya said, and then neither did I. But I eased our pole down until I felt the soft layer give. The bottom hugged the pole with a suggestion like the hand of someone who doesn't want you to leave. I pushed. Something bumped. A shape with edges. Eric fed the weighted line down and circled it, then tightened. "Got you," he said, and grinned out of habit like he was landing a fish. We pulled together and the line came up with a sucking sound that made my jaw ache. At first it was just a rectangle. Then as the mud washed away in the small wakes our bodies made, we saw buttons, a control head, a panel from a boat console. The label under one switch was still legible. Red Arrow 1 F-gate, Red 01 floodgate. The words we'd heard. I nearly said, "I told you so," but I didn't tell them anything. I knew less now than I had. We laid the panel in the bottom of the boat and the 3 of us stared at it like it would confess. Eric touched the casing with a finger, then jerked his hand back. "Static," he said, shaking out his fingers and then laughing because the word was exactly wrong and somehow right. "It bit me." "Again," Maya said, meaning another dip. "There's more." She had a stubbornness I recognized from my younger self. I nodded. We dropped the line again and again. We brought up a microphone on a curly cord lacquered with silt that dried into a fine powder when it hit the air. We brought up a bracket shaped like a question mark. We brought up an aluminum plate that could have been part of a dash, with a serial number half scrubbed by sand. And then we brought up a thing that made me sit down before I fell. A radio handset in a cradle that was old but not as old as the others, the model we used until 12 years ago. Its cable had been cut wrong, not by corrosion but by something that wanted it severed in a hurry. The push-to-talk button on its side was still shiny in a way that made it look wet even when it wasn't. When I touched it, the speaker in my current radio, the new one clipped to my vest, crackled and said simply, "Lane." Not a desperate shout. Not a tape echo. Just my name. Maya and Eric looked at me like I'd conjured it. I glanced over the side at the water where little bubbles were rising in a slow boil, each popping without sound. The hair on my arm stood up. "Okay," I said. "That's enough." I put the old handset in a dry bag with more care than I've used handling newborns. I don't say that to be dramatic. I felt like if I jostled it too hard, it would answer a question I hadn't asked. Back at the station, Rosa took one look at the pile of pulled metal and wiped her hands on her pants like she was about to push me. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked. "History," I said, which was the wrong answer. "Trouble," she corrected, which was right. We logged everything. We added a new sheet to the binder for recovered items with a column for where and how and a column I only added because I felt stupid not adding it. What it said. We put the pieces into the locker. Eric labeled the bags like museum pieces. Maya wrote 8233 in tiny, tidy digits on a sticky note and put it on the locker door. "For the graveyard," she said. That night I didn't sleep because sleep feels like a tide you have to be willing to let cover your nose. I sat with the new old handset on my kitchen table out of the bag, on a towel. I turned my radio off and left it there too, like 2 magnets that might decide to agree. At 2:17 a.m. the room went a degree colder, the way it does when a cloud covers the moon. The handset vibrated. Not a lot, just enough that the towel's nap changed under it. I put my fingers on it and felt a pulse. Our distress tone echoed softly from somewhere that was not in the room. It sounded like it came through the drywall and the water pipes. Then the handset speaker, dead for a decade at the bottom of the lake, uttered a single word: compromised. It was not my voice. It was not anyone I recognized. I said copy to a thing that wasn't asking me to. People ask me why I didn't take it to the state or call someone who wears a tie to work. I can't explain it except to say I felt like we had opened a room that had been closed a long time, and I didn't want to invite a crowd. I told myself we'd run one more controlled search, chart the debris field, and then decide. That's what we did. The next day, Maya and Eric and I went back out in improved weather with a rope grid and markers. We found the main body of the sunken patrol boat half sunk into the floor itself, the way a boot sinks into clay over a summer. The angle was wrong, tipped brutal to starboard, bow dug deep. The windshield was shattered long ago. The steering wheel had a rope knotted around it, as if someone in the last second had tied the boat to itself. We hovered over the hull with the engine off, drifting, half hypnotized by the ghost of the boat that had once been ours. I reached down with the hook and scraped where the console would have been. The mud clung and then let go like reluctant fingers. A dark hole opened and rained fragments of black water. "Don't," Maya said, like she was watching me borrow from a future I wouldn't pay back. I did anyway. My ring tapped something that rang like a bell, muffled. I put my palm against the hole and felt cold radiate out like breath from a winter basement. My radio came to life. This time it did not try to be delicate. The distress tone blared so loud I thought the speaker would peel. Eric cursed and smacked at his ear. The loud tone cut off like someone had put a hand over it, and then a voice not quite mine but wearing my posture said, "Lane to base. Advise." Then, in that same voice, "Mayday. Boat rolled. Position." It punched out a string of numbers I did not want to memorize. I shut the radio off. I shut it off and it kept talking. My stomach went hollow. The voice repeated my name like a test of a PA system. Lane. It said the word compromised and the number 8233. Eric shouted, "What is this?" And for a second I thought he meant the boat, the history, the lake. He meant the sound of me saying a thing I hadn't said yet. I turned the radio upside down and pulled the battery. The voice died. The lake didn't. I put the battery in my pocket like a person burying a match. We didn't speak while we idled out. Not even when the boat hit something soft hard under the surface that pushed us 6 inches sideways. Only when we got back to open water did Maya say in a hoarse little voice, "That was your voice." I didn't answer because if I agreed I would have to make other agreements. Eric squeezed the back of his neck. "The old radio at the shop chirped when you said your own name," he said. "If I were a different person, I'd bring a priest and a sledgehammer. He is not a different person." He followed me to the dock and helped me tie up without meeting my eye. The county sent a guy the next day to ask why we were dredging without permits. I said we weren't dredging. He said pulling a console out of the lake counts. I nodded and scratched behind my ear and apologized because his job wasn't to hear what the radio said at 2 a.m. It was to make us follow rules that protect the place even from us. I moved the recovered parts to the station's back room, the one where we keep life jackets that smell like 50 summers. I wrote a memo I didn't send because who was it to? I tried not to go back. I told myself I was done opening that hole. I told myself the lake remembers and maybe the kindest thing is to let it keep that job. Then the weekend came and the lake filled with trucks pulling trailers and campers hauling firewood, and every cypress knee looked like a knuckle again, and every sound on the radio made me flinch. Late Sunday afternoon, a thunderhead parked itself over the far end of the lake and turned the world into a bruise. We asked everyone to come off, most did. A few didn't because the fish were finally biting. We went out anyway because that's the job. The storm hit on the return leg. A hard sideways rain that flattens the water. We ducked under the brim of it and pushed throttle against wind. I couldn't see the bow through the sheet. The compass was a suggestion. The first voice was mine again through the rain from the radio I had not turned on. "Lane to base, advise," it said like a man waking up late for a habit. Then another voice, older, rough, saying a name I've only seen in the old logs. "Sutter." The radio bent both voices together like two sticks tied at the middle. A moment later, the distress tone punched through the storm and ricocheted off the water. "Compromised," said my voice, and then the other voice said, 8233, and then the two together said, "Red 01 floodgate." The storm wind tore the words sideways. The lake slapped the hull like a repetition. I turned the boat a little too sharp and we slid 6 feet and hit a submerged something that lifted us and dumped us like an animal shaking off a fly. The motor coughed and caught. I felt a slow roll in my guts as the boat found the new surface. Maya grabbed the gunwale. "We're over it," she said. Not the obstacle. The place. We were over the boat's grave. My chest felt empty and full. I don't pray, but I made a shape of a prayer that didn't say much. I eased the throttle up just a hair because momentum is sometimes the only thing that keeps you from becoming what you're sitting on. We slid off the unseen ridge. The deepest part of the storm moved away like a theater curtain. Back at the dock, I kissed the dry land in my head and logged our return. Maya squeezed my shoulder before she left like she didn't need to say anything. I showered at the station because the smell of lake water on skin makes me feel like I'm not quite myself. I put on a clean shirt that stuck to my damp back anyway. I sat at my desk and looked at the old radio in its bag. I opened the logbook to a blank page. I wrote, heard my voice again. I didn't write what it said. At 2 a.m, I woke to a metallic clunk from the porch. I thought raccoon, then realized raccoons don't tap like knuckles. I stood and the floor felt like I was on a boat again. This way, not in the house, but in the hinge of me. I opened the door and found my own handheld radio sitting on the porch rail where I never leave it. The screen was dark. The antenna pointed toward the lake because of course it did. I picked it up and it was warm in a way that implied it had been under a hand. Mine? The porch light hummed. The water out there was a darker black than what it should be. The speaker against my palm climbed from nothing to a thrum like a big animal purring. I brought it to my ear against my better judgment. Lane, my voice said, and then said my last name like we do when we're formal on a channel, and then said the name of this road, and then said the numbers like a sequence, slow, like counting the stairs down. 8233. It didn't sound like a call for help. It sounded like a roll call. I whispered copy, not wanting to wake the trees. In the morning, Carly came by and found me staring at the lake with a stupid look. She made coffee and put it in my hand. "You've got to stop letting this get in your head," she said. "Which is sister for you look wrecked." I told her it wasn't in my head because I wanted her to tell me it was. She didn't. She asked to see the old logs. We went to the station. Rosa watched us with her mouth set like a knot. She doesn't like when the job creeps into the parts of us that have to drive home. Carly turned the pages quiet. She found a name I had skimmed, Ranger Sutter. Disappeared 1979, not a lot of details. A mention of radio compromised and then partial recovery. The supervisor notes carefully avoided implication. My sister traced a finger over the penciled note. 8233. She said, "You should take flowers," then immediately looked embarrassed. "Not for a man you didn't know," she said. For whatever is marking it." I didn't take flowers. That would have felt like deciding something. I took my boat hook and Maya took her stubbornness and Eric took his curse words. We went out again in good light as if light could be a talisman. The lake was the color of tea poured thin. The place where the boat rested had a slickness to its surface that could have been oil, or could have been nothing. I eased us over the hull and anchored with a soft drop. We didn't touch anything for a full minute, and in that minute, the radio in my vest vibrated without making sound. A little tremor you could mistake for your own pulse if you wanted to. I didn't want to. Maya said, "What if this is how the lake tells itself what happened? What if every sound stamped into that mud got pressed together so tight it became one thing, and now it bleeds through when it feels like it?" It was a weird, lovely thought, and I wanted it to be true because it was almost comforting. The idea that the place cataloged us and meant no harm. Eric said, "Then why does it say your name?" I didn't answer. I lowered the hook again like a person knocking on a door they know is the wrong one. The hook hit something light and then dense. Wood? Bone? Don't think bone. I moved the hook left and it slid into a space and then caught. I pulled and a small object came free, trailing a tail of roots and silt. A badge, the star shape was still a star. The enamel that said Ranger in a curve across it was dulled but legible. The pin on the back was bent. Attached to the pin by a ghost of cord was a laminated card that had been that kind of soft plastic that sloughs into itself after time. The card held almost no writing, but in the right angle of light I could see a block of letters and numbers. Sutter, J741. The badge fit into my palm like a domed stone. I wanted to drop it back into the hole the way you put a book back on a shelf you weren't supposed to pull it from. I didn't. I put it on the towel with the other things we'd taken. The radio in my vest buzzed with enough insistence that I took a step back. It wasn't anger. It was urgency. It popped in a way I felt in my molars, and then, from the speaker, my own voice said in a low tone that I use only when I want the world to listen carefully, "Do not pull me out." I dropped the handset onto the floorboards like it had burned me. Maya sucked in a breath. Eric swore in his Sunday words. The radio on the floor of the boat with grit from my boot stuck to its screen whispered a sentence I will hear when I'm 90 if I'm allowed that far. "We replay until we learn, Lane." Static. We replay until we learn. We stood at the center of that patient, humid place and bargained with a memory that wasn't ours. I said out loud to no one, "Okay." I said, "We'll put it back." I was talking about the badge, the panel, the microphone, the handset, the knotted rope. But I think the lake heard the part I didn't say. About my voice, about the way it had been wearing it like a coat. About the way it had tried to teach me to stop when I should stop. We lowered the badge back into the open mouth of the mud. It vanished quicker than felt possible. We let the panel slide, the metal glinting once as if winking goodbye. We put the microphone back. Eric held the handset a second longer, then nodded at the water. "That's yours," he said to the place and let it go. It sank with a slowness I hated. We idled out in silence. Halfway to open water, my radio hummed and said, very faint and very tired, "Copy." I let out a breath I'd been storing since the first time I'd heard the number. "Are we okay now?" Maya asked nobody. The lake lapped the hull, which is answer enough. Work went back to its usual edges. People got sunburned. A guy in a cowboy hat tried to stand in a canoe and learned about gravity. The bait shop switched its hand-lettered sign to crickets and then back to minnows, depending on whether the crickets had eaten themselves. The county guy forgot about permits because the next thing arrived on his desk. Eric claimed the old radio in the evidence locker had finally gone quiet. He kept it anyway. "As a reminder not to get cocky," he said. I wrote reports about trash and small successes and line breaks. I slept 3 nights in a row like a person with nothing to consider. A week later, Carly called me at dawn. She never calls at dawn. She said, "Are you on the water?" I said no. She said, "I think you need to be." There was something in her voice like someone trying not to throw a glass. I dressed with my hands not quite able to commit. At the dock, I found the air heavy and the light not committed to being day. I pushed off alone because I didn't want anyone else's breathing to make me think I heard something else. I rode a slow line to the old place and then past it, into a channel that looks like a dream of a road from above. I killed the motor near an island of knees that look like they've been counting. The radio on my vest was off. It's important you understand I had turned it off. I had replaced the battery with a new one and then turned it off like a ritual, like knocking on wood. The speaker clicked anyway, the way a speaker does when it discharges energy after you unplug it. Then it spoke not with a voice but with a room full of voices layered thin, like hearing a crowd in the next building. I couldn't pick words. I could pick the shape of distress. I could pick the rhythm of procedures. I could pick my own voice trying to be calm. I did not want to be any one of those voices. I turned the volume knob because I couldn't stop myself, and when I reached the halfway mark, one voice separated from the rest like a single fish stepping out of a school. It was mine. It said, "Lane to base. We're rolled. Advise." The words sounded like a thing already decided. It sounded like a tape you find in a drawer after the funeral. The radio continued as if it had a script I didn't know. It rattled off the coordinates the old voice had tried to start in the storm. They matched the X on my map I had not admitted I'd drawn. Then it said softer, "Not yet." The lake pressed against the hull like the flank of a large animal. I wanted to tell it I heard. I reached to key the mic and realized my thumb had already pressed the button. "Copy," I said to myself. There's a thing I haven't said because I don't know how to put it as anything other than a confession. Every ranger who last held a thing that did not come back feels the shape of it in their jaw for years. When a life jacket goes missing, you imagine the person who should be under it. When a rope breaks, you taste the frayed ends as if they were on your tongue. When a boat goes down and its radio becomes part of the floor, those of us who inherit the ledger carry it like a pocket stone. And sometimes the stone is a mouth. I turn my radio off every night and set it on the porch rail with the antenna pointing toward the lake because it feels honest. The lake says my name less now. When it does, it is not a call. It is a roll call. It is a memory asking me not to pretend I am exempt. I answer without the button in my throat. It is a ritual. If I forget, I wake to the sound of the distress tone in the pipes. Maya keeps her hair tied up now so it won't trail into the water when she leans to pull a line. She talks less on the radio, and when she does, she enunciates like a person who knows her words are seeds that might grow in mud later. Eric pretends none of this happened and brings us donuts without asking if we want them. Rosa prints the old logs, scans them, and files the scans, and then keeps the paper anyway, because some things don't live on screens. Carly walks my shoreline most evenings and pretends to be looking for agates, which don't really exist here. 2 nights ago, the swamp was so quiet I could hear insects bumping against the screen door. I dozed in the chair like an old man because the day had been full of small things that weigh as much as one big thing. The radio on the rail cracked and said my name in the voice of the old ranger Sutter, a voice I've never heard but knew anyway. It said clear as glass, learn. Then the wind shifted and the strands of moss all around the yard swung together like a choir swaying at the same hymn. The radio said nothing else. The lake did not send up a bubble or a fish. The night moved on in the direction night always moves. Today I logged a routine patrol and wrote as a line item, checked channel 6 for bleed. There was nothing to report. The number 8233 did not speak. The red 01 floodgate lives in photographs now, and the wooden gate they replaced is long since rotted away wherever wood goes when it becomes everything again. The old badge is not in my pocket, and if anyone asks, I will say we put it in the locker with the rest. This afternoon, I opened the evidence locker to get a spare life jacket for a school group. I didn't go in to check on the radio. I didn't look at it. But when I closed the door, I heard a single thin beep from inside like a microwave announcing something is finished, except no one was cooking. I stood there with the door handle in my hand and counted to 10. Rosa looked up and considered asking me why I was counting. Then she decided to let me be superstitious in peace. If I've learned anything worth sharing, it's the small habit of hearing. The sound of rain starting somewhere else. The sound of a rope tightening against metal. The sound of your own voice when you don't mean to use it. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's the lake rehearsing what it will say when I deserve to hear it. Maybe it's a trick of atmosphere and aging electronics and a man who let his job settle into parts of him that aren't built for it. I can live with any of those. I can live with pieces. When the heat gets heavy and the trees stop fidgeting and the water goes sticky flat just at dusk, you might hear it too if you're around here. A sound like someone sending themselves a message from a long way off. If you do, don't answer without thinking. The place remembers. It doesn't forget. It repeats until it learns or until you do. And if you hear your own name, be careful what you say back because sometimes the person you're reassuring is not the one you think. I'm saying that to you, and I'm saying that to the water. And I'm saying that to whatever waits under that quiet skin like a story that isn't done speaking. I'm typing this on a quiet Thursday because the air finally smells like rain instead of pine smoke. And for the first time in a long time, I can breathe without tasting ashes at the back of my throat. I've kept this to myself for years because I figured it was fatigue, or loneliness, or my brain playing tricks after too many night shifts above a black sea of trees. But the dreams have started coming back, and I don't want them to be the last record. If you don't believe me, that's fine. I'm not trying to convince anyone. I just want to put what happened somewhere outside my head before I go to sleep and hear the crackling again. I was a seasonal fire watch for the Texas A&M Forest Service, Piney Woods District. The summer we almost lost half a county. Most people think of West Texas when they picture wildfires, mesquite flats, and heat blur. But the East is its own kind of tinderbox when the rain forgets us. Longleaf and loblolly stand shoulder to shoulder out there, resinous and humming with insects. In a dry year, you can hear the forest like breath behind a door. My tower was old and tall and not meant for anyone with weak knees. You could see the rust as you approached. Those ladder steps stamped with diamond texture and the paint thin as onion skin on the guy wires. The tower cabin was a single-window shack with a battered Osborne firefinder in the middle, and a map table with the corners curled up from humidity. I loved it weirdly. Up there, you are alone with wind and distance and the radio voice of someone far away who remembers to check on you at the top of the hour. My name's Eli. I had done a couple of summers before that one. My crew lead was a woman named Dana, whose hands were always busy tying and untying knots in a length of paracord when she talked. Another watch was an old-timer called Buck, who'd worked when folks still called them lookouts instead of watchers. He had the kind of laugh that makes you think of screened porches and sweet tea. The dispatcher most nights was Carla, a mother of 3 who kept the county awake from a chair in a fluorescent room with a wall of radios and a clock that always ran fast. I'm adding these names because part of what keeps me up is how quickly they turned into voices and then suddenly into nothing. I took the last 6 shifts that season because Buck's gout flared and Dana's sister had a baby. There's not much to do in town when the heat sits on you, so I packed a thermos, a battered paperback, a bag of sunflower seeds, and a little yellow notebook where I made a habit of drawing the tree line like a heartbeat. It felt good to be useful. That first night I parked by the chain link gate, keyed in the padlock code, and drove the sandy 2-track to the foot of the tower. The sun was a red coin slipping into the trees. I looked up and the ladder rungs were black cutouts ascending into an orange sky like piano keys. You don't think about gravity until you are 70 feet up with a stiff wind talking through the wires. The cabin door had a stubborn latch. Inside, same old smell. Dust, mouse, a faint tang of hot metal. The radio crackled. "Lookout 3, this is base. You online yet?" Carla's voice, "Online," I said. "Good evening, Mother Hen." "Don't you start with me," she said, amused. "Report in at the hour. Radar's clean. Let's hope it stays that way." It didn't. The first hour, the horizon was uneventful. The second, some teenagers somewhere found their way to the old pipeline road and decided that shooting fireworks into a ditch was a great way to impress each other. I watched the faint fizz and reported the direction. A deputy rolled by them 10 minutes later. I heard his voice on another frequency telling them to go home while they giggled and put on their best manners. It wasn't even dark enough yet for the real trouble. At 10:17 I saw it. A soft orange that at first seemed like a trick of my eyes, like the afterimage you get when you stare at a camera flash. But it didn't go away. It was to the northeast, a little above the 3rd ridgeline. Not the hard spike of a flame through trees. A steady glow, low and persistent. Maybe a 1/4 mile in diameter by my rough guess, like somebody had put a lantern under a blanket and dragged it slowly along the ground. I lifted the finder, centered the crosshairs, read off the azimuth and distance. Base, lookout 3. Possible ignition northeast by east about, call it 6 miles, no column. Just glow. Carla took it down, voice losing its laughter. Copy, lookout 3. I'm waking up a brush unit. Hold for confirmation, I held. The glow moved a little, and when I say moved, I mean it drifted in a smooth, deliberate curve like someone tracing a circle with a compass. Trees don't burn like that. Fire creeps and leaps. It doesn't draw geometry. A minute later. Lookout 3. Unit 4 sees nothing from the road. You got eyes on any smoke? No smoke, I said. Just a disk of light. Could be haze off a pond. Copy, she said, not believing it either. We'll drive the fire lanes. Keep an eye. At 10:44, the glow winked out like a light bulb. No trucks reported anything. They prowled the sandy tracks with bar lights casting hungry tooth shapes through the understory and found no flame. No footprints, no beer cans, nothing but the whisper of pine needles and cicadas saying their names. It was chalked up as heat lightning, which is just regular lightning you didn't see. A reasonable lie that we tell ourselves. I wrote it down anyway in my yellow notebook. 10:17, 10:44, orange disk, NE, moved in a circle. No one asked to see the notebook. No one ever did. Night 2 was a little breezier and a little stranger. I had a friend visit for the first couple of hours. Nate. He and I went to high school together, and then he stayed in town while I went to community college for a bit. He manages the bait and tackle place by the lake. Knows everyone's truck by sound. He brought a bag of pork rinds and a 6-pack of Dr. Pepper. He climbed in nervous little moves, muttering about broken necks. When he got to the platform, he stood with his hands on his knees, panting and laughing like he'd just gotten off a roller coaster. He'd never been that high without walls over him. This thing creaks like it's trying to remember a song, he said, poking the ceiling with the back of his knuckle. That's just the wires talking, I said, and showed him how the finder worked. I pointed out the distant red blink of a radio tower, the way the old logging road cut a subtle line through the trees, the black hump of a ridge where nothing grew because dirt had slid off in a hard rain 15 years ago. Nate made the appropriate noises and then settled into the corner with the Dr. Pepper, tapping his boot heel like he had an invisible cigarette to keep lit. We were telling that dumb story you tell about the time we almost hit a hog on FM 287 and how it sounded like someone dropping a wardrobe when it bounced off the guardrail. And then I saw the glow again. Not northeast this time. East-southeast at maybe 5 miles. Same slow round motion like someone tracing a plate on a tablecloth. You seeing that? I said. Nate stood up and braced an elbow on the window frame, eyes narrowing. It's moving, he said, surprised into seriousness. But it ain't drifting. It's circling? Base, I said into the radio. Lookout 3. I've got visual on a glow ESC at 5 miles. No smoke column. Moving slow, Carla's voice was a thin wire. Copy. Units 5 and 7 are rolling that way. Weather says humidity's up a tick. We shouldn't be popping this late. Nate kept staring. Is that somebody running a burn in a clear cut? At this hour, I said. No way. We watched the orange circle close its perfect loop and then begin another, like a delicate compass drawing on black construction paper. It continued for 9 minutes. Then, as calmly as a porch light flipping off at bedtime, it disappeared. The brush units drove the lanes. They reported nothing. When the crews finally called in that the roads were quiet, Nate let out a breath and said, "That's above my pay grade," and then made a joke about alien wedding rings, but his laugh didn't get all the way to his eyes. We sat a while longer and nothing else happened. He climbed down, headlamp stuttering off the metal steps, and then his taillights receded through the trees. The tower felt emptier after that, like the space his presence had left got filled with something else. I wrote down the time and the direction and underlined witness present. Then I stared at my own handwriting for a long time, listening to one of the guy wires lightly thrum like a bass string when the wind nudged at it. Night 3 is when I told Dana. She had come back for day shifts to relieve Buck for a few hours at a time, and she was sitting in the base with Carla when I called in my hourly. You learn voices intimately through a radio. You can hear the sour edge of a headache, the smile someone doesn't realize is in their tone. "How's Her Majesty the Tower?" Dana said. "Stately," I said. "And weird." Then I told her. I kept the words plain and steady. How you talk when you're saying your social security number over a bad connection. There was a pause. "Then, you been sleeping, Eli?" "As much as anyone," I said, and glanced at the hammock-strung caddy corner that I rarely used because if I slept, I always dreamed of walking the ladder down and finding it missing the last 10 rungs. "What did the note say?" she asked. "Same spot last night as first night?" Carla asked, curiosity edging off duty. "Different spot," I said. "Same shape. Same motion." "Let us know the minute you see it," Dana said. "We can loop Mendez." That would be Sheriff Mendez, a practical man with a silver streak in his hair who carried himself like an exhausted school teacher. He had once bought me an ice cream when I called in a timber truck on fire, and they caught it before it spread to the ditch. At 9:53 I saw the glow again. West this time, past the highway curve where the church with the blue roof sat, moving in a circle, slow as the second hand on one of those wall clocks in a dentist office. I read the bearings. "Copy," Dana said. "Hold for confirmation." There was a click and some muffled conversation, and then Mendez's voice on another channel. "Lookout 3, you saying you have a glow but no column?" "Affirmative. I'm at mile marker 212, I'll take a look." He did. His car washed the trunks with white like bones as he drove. He turned down the service road, bounced through a potholed patch you could hear through the radio, then stopped and got out. "I heard frogs," he said. "I got nothing here but my own headlights." And then after a quiet second, "Stand by." He moved away from the cruiser. I could imagine his beam moving like a finger pointing and being swallowed by understory. He came back a minute later and keyed up. "Lookout 3, chalk me up to the old man club. But I believe you saw something and I believe it's gone. Because it isn't here." He let out a breath and gave a small, tired laugh. "I need more deputies or fewer mysteries." That was the night the station smoke alarm chirped once at 2 a.m. for no battery reason, and Carla swore and banged it with a flashlight, and the hairs on my arms lifted like static was walking through the cabin. It was nothing. It was everything. I wrote Mendez on scene, no fire. Glow persisted 8 minutes circle west. Then I sketched a little circle on the map where I thought it was. The pencil left a dent in the paper where I pressed too hard. Night 4 gave us heat lightning for real, translating distant storms into a dull throbbing to the south. The tower seemed to float between blinks like some cheap ride at a fair. I was down a thermos and up one stubborn headache. Carla read barometer numbers in a lullaby voice between calls from bored deputies, and a woman who liked to report imaginary trespassers at the feed store, then apologize for talking. Around midnight, someone banged on the steel ladder from below. If you've never had a sound travel up a hollow metal spine to your feet when you're alone above trees and living on coffee, you cannot know the particular quality of that feeling. There were 3 quick dings like a wrench dropped from one rung to the next by a careless mechanic. I froze. A rational part of me thought raccoon. The part that still keeps a nightlight thought someone in a firefighter's jacket and a face like old bark looking up grinning. "Who's there?" I called, hating that I sounded like a homeowner in a bad movie. The wind moved the guy wires in little sighs. I heard nothing else. I went to the trapdoor and aimed my light down through the grid of the hatch. Nothing but the ladder going away and the idea of ground. "Base, I've got contact on the ladder," I said. It sounded crazy even to me, so I added, "Probably an animal." "Want me to send somebody?" Carla asked. "Nah," I said with a bravery I didn't feel. "It's nothing." At 1:06 the glow returned. This time it was closer, maybe 3 miles south-southwest. My mouth went dry the way it does before you stand up to talk in front of strangers. The circle it traced wasn't quite perfect. It wobbled slightly like a hand had trembled. "Base," I said. Visual 3 miles SSW moving. There was a pop on the line and then a new voice, tired and patient. Buck. He was off duty, but he had a scanner at home. He liked to call in with dad energy when we sounded rattled. "How big a circle, son?" "Hard to say," I said. 100 yards radius? Maybe less. And I stopped. The glow had changed. The circle it traced wasn't a circle anymore. It stretched as if drawn out like taffy, narrow at one end, wide at the other. It looked, if I'm honest, like a bare human footprint laid gently on the forest. It's different." "How different?" Buck prompted gently. He had that way of making your breath slow down just by speaking. Like a track," I said. I hated the word as soon as it left my mouth because it made the world too small and too strange all at once. "It's longer than it is wide. It's shaped." My hand drew it in the air and I was embarrassed even though no one could see me. "And it's moving." "Which way?" Buck asked. I swallowed. "Toward the tower." A long breath from the radio, like someone about to tell a child something you can't soften. "Copy," Buck said. "Stay put. I'm calling Mendez." The glow lasted 6 minutes. It traced a long, careful shape, then went out. When I leaned on the sill, the metal was warm under my palm like a seat someone had just vacated. I wrote it in the notebook and underlined it twice. Then I folded the page over, as if I could keep the words from looking at me. Night 5. Dana insisted on coming up with me for the first hour. She's not a night person, but she climbed with purpose. A headlamp making the metal smear silver beneath her hands. She's 5'8", wiry, strong from years of fieldwork. Her breath was even by the time she stepped through the hatch. "It always feels smaller up here than I remember," she said. "Like the air got trimmed to fit." She set down a plastic container of brownies wrapped in 2 layers of plastic like a gift you aren't supposed to eat. "Carla says you're scaring the church ladies." "Am I scaring you?" I asked. "I don't scare easy," she said. But she looked past me toward the south without meaning to. We stood shoulder to shoulder in a small box over the trees and watched nothing. She told me about her sister's baby and how you can love a person you've met for 15 minutes. Like you jump directly to having known them forever. I told her about Nate and how he acts like he's nobody's anything, but in a pinch, he's the first one with a jump start and a spare in the truck bed. We stood, we sipped, we waited. When nothing came, she laughed at herself and said, "See? It's just heat. It's tricks." She checked the guy wires with a hand tug and then made me promise to call if I even thought I saw something. She climbed down and her light made her look like a moth bumping methodically against a jar. The glow found me at 2:20 a.m., not a circle. A long oval, then another spaced a long stride ahead, then another. Each one a little brighter than the last, each one appearing and fading like a foot on a hot floor. I did not call it in for a full 30 seconds because I couldn't convince my mouth to cooperate. Then I did, and the words sounded far away, small. "Base," I said quietly. "It's walking." "Excuse me?" Carla said sharply, and I could hear her sit up in her chair. "It's walking," I said louder. "Foot-shaped fires." "Not fires, glows moving north-northwest." I read the bearing. Toward me. Somewhere something fell off a desk. "I'm waking everyone," Carla said. Then another voice cut in from an unknown radio with a soft click like a throat being cleared. "This is Mendez. Stay on the line, Eli." He used my name like a bandage. I stayed. The steps were far, then closer. Not close enough to show individual trees. Close enough to sense the depth lift a little in that direction. Like the forest was inhaling. Mendez said, "We have crews staged on Fire Lane 3 and Hickory Cut. They are reporting no visible fire." He did not say any other word. He did not say the one I was thinking. I think he refused to let it exist. The footsteps, if I can call them that, reached a point I knew. There was an old hunter's camp down there, a flat patch where somebody had left a rusted grill and a broken camp chair a few seasons back. I'd been there on foot once. I could picture it. The old beer bottles with labels melted by the sun, the ring of rocks holding ash, a piece of blue tarp flapping and shredding like dead skin. The glow paused there, sustained like weight had shifted. The air in the tower felt denser, as if a window had been closed, although the windows were open and the night moved through like breath. Then the glow kept going, north-northwest toward my tower. It stopped again where the ground hit a drainage dip I also knew. It lingered. It resumed. "Lookout 3, Dana said, back on the radio. Her voice had a new edge, that leader edge that says, "Get your hands on the wheel." "If you feel unsafe," I laughed, a tiny brittle thing that sounded wrong in my own ears. "Define unsafe, boss." "I mean it," she said. "There's no hero badge for this." "I'm not a hero," I said. "I'm just describing." The steps came on. They faded as they went, as if each foot burned, then cooled. When they were, by my estimation, within a mile, they stopped. The glow went out. The forest became only a dark mass again, alive by sound alone. I kept listening for a long time to something you couldn't hear. I did what you do when something just outside your understanding has paused at the edge of your world. I made tea in a stained metal mug that tasted like 100 other nights, and I told myself it was a trick of the air, a quarry's sodium lights bouncing off haze, a prankster with a drone, but we all knew it wasn't any of those. And because we knew that and wanted to keep working tomorrow, we didn't say the simple thing out loud. I wrote in the notebook and did not draw a picture that time because I was afraid my hand would make it too real. On the morning of day 6, the district chief phoned me on my landline while I was sprawled with my boots off and a fan breathing over my back. He had the flattened calm of someone who doesn't have time for superstition. "We're bringing in a plane tomorrow to fly the grid," he said. "For today, you are top eyes. If you see it again, you call it, but Eli, don't go looking." "Sir?" I said, not because I needed the word, but because I needed the second it bought me. "You heard me," he said. "People get turned around out there in daylight." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "People go looking at night and become names on crosses beside county roads," I told Nate at lunch. He came by with fried catfish and sat on the tailgate behind my apartment and pushed a styrofoam container toward me without saying anything for a while. We don't talk much if there's nothing necessary to say. After, he wiped his hands on a paper towel and said, casually, like he was reminding me to check a tire pressure, "Don't be brave for a radio." "I'm not brave," I said, which is one of those statements that becomes less true the more you say it. "I'm curious." "That there is the problem," he said, and then looked away, which is how he says he loves you with a man face on. I went to the tower early that night like an idiot trying to meet a storm halfway. The sunlight was bronze. A woodpecker was working a dead pine trunk halfway up, and the tap sounded like coins dropping into a glass. I paused at the fence because a strip of police tape I had never seen was tied there, flapping. Had they been out here without telling me? I thought of deputies walking carefully through trees, shining lights, finding nothing but sandy soil and the smell of warm sap. I climbed, hands on metal, copper smell in my mouth. At the hatch I stopped because there were small black smears there I didn't recognize. They were like someone had put a hand on the underside and lifted away and left the heat behind. I touched one with my fingertip. It was only shadow. The sun had lit the ladder rungs in such a way that the gaps threw dark ovals that looked like fingerprints. My heart did a stupid thing in my chest. I laughed at myself, breathy. "Get it together," I whispered. I crawled in, shut the hatch, and made my rounds. Check the kit. Check the radio, check the weather. Check the wall of old memos where a coffee ring had made a halo around a paper about snakebite procedure. I waited. At 9:12, I keyed the radio and reported the quiet. At 10:06, I did it again. Carla hummed something under her breath between calls, a habit of hers when she was bored. At 10:47, I saw the first glow. Not far at all. 2 miles south. A long oval shape, then another leading north. I read the bearing without being asked. It is comforting to be asked for information as though information is the shield we've all agreed upon. The steps approached. 3 minutes. 7. I paced, then forced myself to stop because the movement made me feel like I was calling something to me. Like those dreams where you walk a hallway and the door never gets closer. The footsteps stopped at the drainage dip. They resumed. Then they paused at the hunter's camp. I pictured the broken chair, the ring of stones, the ash. The air in the cabin warmed like someone had opened an oven door 2 rooms away. The back of my neck prickled. Sweat gathered at my temples, though it wasn't that hot. I said softly, "Base," and then didn't know why I had, and then couldn't think of what to add. Mendez came on, not waiting for permission. "We have units on Hickory Cut," he said. "They report no visible fire." His voice had acquired the flatness of someone refusing to look where a shadow is moving on the wall. "Eli, I want you to stay put. Do not attempt the ladder." I wanted to tell him I had no intention of attempting anything. I wanted to tell him that the ladder suddenly felt like a story you tell a child about how grown-ups can reach them. Instead, I said, "Copy," and put both hands on the sill because the cabin felt like it was rocking on a ship. The glow kept coming. When it reached what I judged was a 1/4 mile from the base of the tower, it didn't pause the way it had at the camp or the dip. It accelerated, if a series of appearing and fading shapes can be said to accelerate. I watched, breath held without deciding to, as if exhaling would pull the glow faster. There were 6 long ovals. Then 3, then 1, then nothing. The forest at the base of my tower was dark again, silent except for the hiss of insects and the occasional thunk of a pine cone giving up and falling. "Lookout 3, Dana's voice small now. She had probably left her paracord somewhere. "I lost it," I said. I shivered, though my shirt clung to my back. "It's gone." "Good," Mendez said into a silence that was not good. "Units hold position. Lookout, keep eyes on." I kept them on so hard they burned. Minutes ticked, slow and huge. You can measure time in radio chatter, in the squeaks of a chair in a dispatch room, in a deputy's bored complaint about mosquitoes, in a brush of wind that makes a note through wires. 10 minutes went by. 20. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd rationed and laughed quietly to prove to myself I could. I walked the 4 steps to the map table. I reached for my pencil to put a small cross where I thought the last step had been. A moth landed on the map, smearing its powder against the line of a county road. I touched it gently with my knuckle and it lifted and floored in a small arc. I felt foolish and grateful at once, like someone had called to say the test was rescheduled. From the corner of my eye, something orange lifted. I turned so fast my shoulder banged the window frame. Outside the window, not at the base of the tower but halfway up, a glow moved in the air like the reflection of a campfire in someone's eyes. For a second I thought it was a truck I hadn't heard turning onto the service road. A bar of light sliding and catching, but there was no engine, no crunch of tires, no road. The glow resolved into shape, not circle, not oval, the long curve of a heel, the ball of a foot, a fan of toes pressed to the night like someone had leaned their weight against the dark. It was right there, 2 feet beyond the glass, and it moved with a slow, patient gravity, up and to the right. I did not speak into the radio because all that existed then was that gentle upward motion and the way the cabin seemed to tilt toward it. The glow climbed, not like flame. Flame licks and leaps and devours. This moved with care, each impression appearing and then dimming, and the metal of the ladder outside the windowsills caught it faintly, shining as if it had acquired a skin temperature warmth. You know how in a hot shower the glass fogs and you can see where your hand touched as a clear shape? It looked like that, except it was night and the glass stayed clean. And the hand, the foot, was on the other side of the world. The radio hissed once, like someone who had held their breath too long, forgetting themselves, and that little normal sound saved me enough to yell, "Base!" loud and sharp, like I was calling a kid out of traffic. "It's here," I said. "It's on the tower, static." Then everything at once. "Units to tower," Mendez said, and I pictured him already moving toward his door. "Lookout 3, do not open the hatch, copy?" "Copy," I said, and then said, "It's..." and couldn't decide what word to put there. I did not want to give it a word. The glow reached the level of the windows. There was a pause, and in that pause the insects seemed to stop for the smallest fraction of a second, as if a conductor had lifted his hand before the downbeat. I could see nothing but the suggestion of warmth delineating absence. If something stood there, it was the size of a man maybe, or maybe taller because the curve of the arch hit a little higher than I expected. The glow pressed and the wall of the cabin made a small sound like wood twisting as it adjusted to temperature. The glow moved slowly rightward, then left as if testing the frame. Then it went higher. "Base," I said. My mouth was dry. "It's at the roof line." "Copy," Dana said, voice breaking into protocol and personal. "We're coming. Just narrate." "Keep talking." So I narrated. "It's above me. The roof's tin. If something's there, I can't hear feet. I can't hear anything. It's just shading the stars." I didn't know until I said it that that was true. Through the roof vent above the stove, the few visible points of light had gone dim as if a hand had passed over them. "Now it's," I swallowed. "I think it's at the hatch." There was nothing to see because the hatch is in the floor. I looked at the square of it anyway. The little ring handle was dull in my headlamp. The radio crackled and 3 people talked at once and then no one did. I did what I always did. I put my hand on the handle of the hatch and felt the metal just to make sure it was there. It was warm. "Don't," Buck said, suddenly on the line like a memory. "Don't you touch that, son." "I'm not," I said, and realized my fingers had tightened and then released. "I won't." There was a smell then. Not smoke the way you think of smoke, choking and thick. More like an old campfire that someone poured water on and stirred with a stick. The wet ash smell that lives in a hoodie for weeks after a trip. It came up through the hatch in a gentle upward draft and sat in the cabin like a quiet guest. I thought about the hunter's camp. I thought about my own hands after breaking down a fire ring in the morning, black in the lines of my palms. I thought about how warmth moves through metal. "Units 2 minutes out," a deputy said. "Lights dark unless you call." "Keep them dark," Mendez said. Then softly, not to the deputy, "Eli, listen to me. Step away from the hatch. Put your back to the far wall. You understand?" I looked at the far wall. It was not far. The cabin has the dimensions of a small shed. I went there. I pressed my shoulders to wood that had absorbed 1,000,000 days of sun and shivered through 1,000,000 nights of cold. My radio cord caught on the corner of the finder and pulled a little. I shrugged it free. I tried not to think of the hatch ring handle as a doorknob. I tried not to think of the thing I wasn't naming as a guest arriving early. The hatch lifted a 1/4 inch and settled back with a soft metallic cluck. Would like to tell you that I didn't make a sound when that happened, but I did. The kind of sound you make when you see your child run toward a curb and a car simultaneously, a small involuntary sound. The hatch did it again, a tiny test like a person learning the weight of a door. The building had been painted and repainted and warped so many times in the heat that the hatch had a habit of sticking. I had to slam it sometimes to seat the latch. Now the latch was talking to whoever or whatever was below. "Base," I said, because the part of my brain that knows about ritual is the part that kept me sane. "It's at the hatch." "Copy," Carla said, and she was crying just enough for me to hear but not enough for her to hear herself. "Units at tower base," there was the faintest of sounds. A whisper more than a sound. Not words. Not even breath exactly. The kind of sound you get when you pour sand slowly through your fingers. It came up through the small seam and it said, not in English, not in anything. That time had been longer than I thought it had, and it had been waiting. And waiting had made it patient. I stepped sideways and the wall pushed back into my shoulder blades. I could have gone out the window. Sometimes we joked about it. If the ladder ever fell and the tower caught, you drop. You aim for a pine, you hope it breaks your ribs instead of your neck. But my body is not a body that jumps voluntarily into darkness. My body is a body that presses flat and watches and talks into radios. "Eli," Mendez said. I realized he had been saying my name for a while and I hadn't heard it. "Eli, on 3 we're going to light the base. Do I have your go?" "No," I said, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. "No lights." "Not yet, son," Buck said gently. "If it's in shadow," I said, though I wasn't sure that was what I meant. "I don't want to teach it about light." There was silence then, but not the kind that empties a room. The kind that fills one. The hatch lifted another 1/2 inch. Not because a hand had yanked, but because metal warms and moves, and someone who knows about the way wood swells knows also how to lift and try again. The ring handle made a small complaint. I could see from where I was the line of brighter air around the hatch where it didn't quite seal. And in that line I saw the smallest, briefest persimmon glow, like the ember at the end of a cigarette in a movie theater back when those were things. It moved past and was gone. 3, I said, and didn't know I was going to say it until I did. Do it. The base lit. Whatever else, we are very good at making the dark leave in Texas. 4 cruisers and 2 brush units threw their beams at the tower's legs and the ground beyond, and light ran up the metal like water poured up instead of down, and the ladder threw a rib cage onto the cabin's underside. I tensed for the thing to slam the hatch back and rise, shaped out of glare. It didn't. The hatch settled. The heat left the metal in a soft sigh. The cabin cooled a fraction. Through the vent, the stars returned. The smell of wet ash thinned like a memory in morning. The radio was a rope that had kept me upright, and I realized I was gripping it with a white-knuckled hand. "Report," Mendez said, businesslike again by sheer effort. "Nothing," I said. "It's gone." "Copy," he said. "Units, sweep perimeter. Eyes up." I sat down on the floor, which is something I never do in the tower because it feels disrespectful to all the dust that won't go away. My legs shook like I'd just jumped from a train and run and made it, and hadn't learned yet that I was safe. Dana's voice was soft in my ear. "Do you want me to come up?" "No," I said too quickly and then again gently because I didn't want any of them up there with me in that moment. "No, thank you." I wiped my face with both hands and they came away damp. I drank water and it hit my stomach like a stone and then like a garden hose pouring straight through me. They stayed at the base a long time. I could hear their radios commenting on small things in that nervous way men talk when they want to fill space. They found nothing. No scorch marks. No footprints. No prank setup. Not even a still warm beer bottle. The sand at the foot of the ladder showed no disturbed patterns. Only a few beetle tracks recording the night's ordinary business. I knew that would be the case before they said it. The thing had never marked the world where we wanted it to. Only where it could. Dawn came as it always does, light soft and gray, then gold. The trees turned back into individual things instead of one big animal lumped against the horizon. Birds started their arguments. The cabin became again a place where a person could feel silly about having been afraid. Mendez stood at the base with his hat off and looked up and didn't wave because it would have made us both into people in a story. He talked to me on the radio like a friend who didn't want to climb a ladder. And then he told me to go home and sleep while the plane flew the grid this afternoon. "You did good," he said, which can mean 100 things, most of which are, "We survived the narrative." I drove out past them and nodded, and nobody made eye contact too long. I slept with my boots on and woke every hour, with my heart racing because in each dream the hatch lifted, another inch and another, and the ring handle turned in a human grip. We never saw the glow again after that night. The plane saw nothing. The season turned kinder. 2 storms blew through in a week and rain fell like someone had turned a faucet you forgot could turn. Smoke washed out of the bark. The world smelled like wet needles, and unless the wind was wrong, you could forget the taste of ash. The district chief declared us lucky. Buck told me to take a week and have a beer by a lake and let my eyeballs unglue from my skull. Carla laughed again the way she had before. Dana tied and untied the paracord with her hands in her pockets and asked me what I'd do in the winter. I said maybe I'd go work with Nate at the bait shop and learn the names of lures because it sounded like a way to be useful and inside and not thinking about ladders for a while. Here's the part where I'm supposed to say, I went down there later against orders because people in stories don't listen, and then the story punishes them. I didn't. I followed directions like a good employee, and I stayed out of the woods at night, and when I hiked in daylight, I kept to trails and lifted my feet like polite conversation. I don't have a scar to show you. I don't have a charred footprint photo. I have the notebook, yes. I haven't opened it in months. It sits on my shelf under a stack of maps and a blue bandana. Sometimes I convince myself that when I pick it up, the words will have faded to something harmless. Sometimes I convince myself I should burn it, and then I don't, because something in me respects records more than superstition. People ask me if I'm still a fire watcher. I tell them yes sometimes. I tell them no sometimes. It depends on what day I'm having. The tower is still there as far as I know. On windy nights when I lie in bed with a fan going and the power lines hum outside, I can hear the guy wires sing in my head, and the cabin rocks a little when I close my eyes. If I drive out that way at dusk, I don't go past the chain link. I don't look up the ladder. But I do roll down the window and breathe the resin, and I try to think of it as a smell that has nothing to do with me. Last week, though, Dana sent me a picture by text. It was just a photo from the cabin window of the ridgeline, a sunset with birds moving like a handful of thrown pepper, And her caption was, "You missed a pretty one." I almost answered right away. Then I noticed the tiny crescent reflection in the glass, just the way anybody's lights would bounce. Probably from her phone, but it sat in the photo, exactly where the hatch would be if the cabin were a mirror. I stared at it until my coffee went cold. I didn't answer. I turned the phone face down and went outside and sat on the stoop while the neighbor's dog threw itself at a moth. Here's what sticks with me now that the air smells like rain. The glows weren't trying to fool anybody. They weren't trickster lights or swamp gas or kids with drones or signals. They were doing what feet do. They were walking home. We had built something high and within reach and said it was ours because we wrote a code on the gate. The land said it had been there first and it was patient, and we would come down eventually because that is what bodies do. Nate asked me once after we'd finished a six-pack and not pretended it was anything else, if I thought the thing would have come in if the lights had stayed off. I told him no because he needed to sleep. What I didn't say then and won't say to Dana or Carla or Buck is that when the hatch tapped the second time, there was a small answering feeling in my palm where I'd held the ring before. A ghost of heat. It felt like the other side of a handshake, and I had the terrible, clear thought that if I had knelt and pressed my hand there and said something welcoming and ordinary, evening, maybe, it would have known my name and I would never have wanted to come down. Not because it meant me harm, because it didn't care about me at all, and there is something like mercy in being small to the thing that sees you. I'm telling you this because you might be the kind of person who likes to find high places and make a box there and call it a job. I'm telling you because if you see a glow move down there, like someone drawing with a warm coin, and you want to put your name on it and say, "My fire, my coordinates, my report," you might forget to think about what is tracing the line. The last thing I'll say is the thing I don't say to anyone when the dreams wake me. Some nights in the hot dark just before rain, I hear a footfall not on tin or metal or wood, but through the way the air around me changes temperature. Like the room and I have both been set briefly on a stove and then lifted. It comes from below the soundless weight of a step and goes on. It doesn't linger. It travels. It heads toward whatever high thing we have built now. And I lie there and don't say a word because the only full sentence I have left is the one I didn't speak when I had the chance. I don't know if it would have mattered. I only know that the hatch moved as if it had practice, and the glow climbed like it had somewhere to be, and I am still waiting for the night when the smell of ash comes up through my floorboards, and the tiny ring on something I cannot see makes that soft, patient sound and lifts.